Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I am glad that you can join me. As I always say, you could be anywhere, so I am happy, satisfied, content, ecstatic that you are just so happen to be here with me. It is a Friday morning. I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend as we're going into, a fantastic week as we go into this weekend. There is a lot of news afoot, but before I get to the news, if you guys find yourself enjoying this content, give it a like, share it. I know I'm saying this earlier. I'll say it again later in the show, probably before Scott comes on. We have a damn good show today. Scott Ritter is going to be on at 7:15. We have another gentleman that was on the show once before, Richard Solomon. He is a socialist libertarian. That should be an interesting conversation. And no, they're not as contradictory as you may think. There's an overlap between socialists and libertarians. It's just the American libertarians get very weird in the way that they go about their political affairs. Some of that stuff is just kooky, but whatever. Richard is going to be on the show. Daniel Lazar is going to be on the show, having a conversation about what is taking place in Europe. Apparently, Georgia is going to investigate the previous administration because they are looking at issues of corruption. Not to mention, you have the French Georgian president, or French-born Georgian president, who is effectively working as a stalking horse for Europe and the European Union to overthrow the government of Georgia. There was that. So apparently they're going to have an investigation into the political affairs of the previous administration. But there's other stuff that's taking place in Europe also that we really want to step into. Dimitri Lascaris is going to come on and have a conversation about what's taking place in Canada, especially Justin Trudeau stepping down as prime minister. And we're going to have the one and only Malik Abdul, my former co-host. He will be on to have a conversation about what is taking place in Republican circles. Donald Trump and the Republican Party are having a strategy session, or had a strategy session, to figure out how they were going to enact and push through the legislative priorities. And I guess the conversation is boiling down to whether this is going to be in two fronts or whether this is going to be in one big package. It's amazing when now the Republicans are in power. It's like, hey, let's have this one big package and get all of this stuff done at once. I would say, though, at least they're doing that. At least they're doing it. Meaning they got elected. And once they got elected, they said, we are going to have a legislative priority and we're going to get that legislative priority done. We're not screwing around. So for the better or for worse, they are pushing through their priorities. And not just on the domestic front, on the international front. I mean, Donald Trump has been making waves in some of the things that he's been doing internationally. He's effectively telling NATO countries that they need to pay now 5%. This is like a mob boss saying, hey, that's a nice restaurant you got there. It'll be sad if anything happens to that restaurant. And, if you pay me this amount of money, I can make sure that nothing happens. I mean, I only need 2% of your profits. And, your restaurant will stay fine. There'll be nothing, no harm or anything that comes to it. I wasn't aware that there was potential harm. Yeah, man, there are all sorts of gangs and there are all of these homeless people out here. And there's, all sorts of, crazy stuff out here, man. Crazy stuff out here. Anything can happen to the restaurant. So, hey, if you need help, me and Tony and Fat John over there, we'll make sure it's safe. And then after a year, hey, we've come into difficulties. And, Fat John, Big Tony, and Little D Junebug over here, inflation has gone up. So now we need 5%. We can't afford 5%. I'm just telling you, man, it's very dangerous out here. Now we need 5%. Meaning Europe has shown itself to be so weak, so incompetent, so sad that Trump has taken on this notion that he doesn't even have to, let's say, assuage feelings about the notion of being a vassal. He's gone into full-blown humiliation mode. It's kind of like a boss. When a boss comes and says, hey, Jamal, can you please do so and so? Okay, well, it's your boss. He's telling you to do it. He's not asking you per se, even though he's put in these kind of pleasantries as he's doing it. It's a way of assuaging your ego, in a sense, of being dictated to or told something to do, despite the fact it's your job. That's different, though, than, hey, idiot, go over there and do this. Okay, well, both of them equate to the same, but those are very different in regards to how one is taking your feelings into account, or taking your own ego, your own sense of self, your own idea of your own worth into account. Europe has gotten to the point where Trump has decided he has no need to take any of this stuff into account. You've given us all of this money for weapons because, again, all of the money you give to Ukraine, like 70% is coming to us for weapons. So thank you for that. You have given us 5 times more than what you were paying for the Russians for energy. So, hey, again, thank you for that. Instead of you getting that cheap Russian oil, you're paying us 5 times more for the oil that we're shipping over to Europe. So, again, thank you very much for that. Now, keep in mind, all of this is money leaving Europe, coming into America. Let's be very clear on that. This is not money flowing the other way. This is money flowing from Europe into America. Okay, now you're paying 5 times more for energy costs. Your businesses can't afford to operate under those costs. So many of those businesses are coming to America. So again, hey, Europe, thank you for that. Good looking out. When we go into our wars in the Middle East, and those people flow into Europe. Well, they flow into Europe. They don't flow into America, despite the fact that our wars. Europe, once again, thank you for that. I need you to pay 2% more for NATO spending or else. Europe, once again, thank you for that. And the 5% that he's talking about, where do you think the money is going? Why do you think Donald Trump is saying, I need you to now pay 5% for NATO expenditures? Because that money is coming to us. When you're thinking of expenditures, weapons, materials, etc., where are they getting it from? They're getting it from us. Meaning Donald Trump knows that money is coming to our weapons manufacturers. That money is flowing into the United States. Europe, thank you again. Thank you very much. Meaning in one instance after the next, he has effectively marginalized Europe and has put it in this clear second-class position and is not taking its feelings into account about the fact that we aren't equals. We aren't friends. We aren't buddies. We aren't allies. You're vassals. There's a difference in those things. It's not like the relationship between, let's say, China and Russia. Those are allies. They work together. They are equals in the way that they regard and they see each other. The U.S. doesn't look at it in those terms. Anyone who is an equal or is a non-vassal to the United States is considered an enemy. Full stop. Any country that doesn't accept that status of a vassal is effectively an enemy. If you look at all of the countries that we are at odds with, those are countries that don't necessarily accept our preeminence in regards to the way we function in the world. And so Europe has found itself to be an occupied nation. I mean, we have all sorts of military bases in Germany right now, despite the fact that I would imagine they call themselves a sovereign state. Okay, it's funny that you think that, but fair enough. You're allowed to think that. Your policies, foreign policy, even domestic policy, is flowing in the context of what we want and what is in U.S. best interests. So this idea that you're talking about a sovereign Europe, again, it's funny that you all think that. If you become sovereign at some point, maybe, but not now, not today, especially not over the course of these last few years. The U.S. literally blew up a pipeline that Europe had invested a ton of money into because it needed the energy from that pipeline. That is astonishing. On top of blowing up the pipeline, Germany had this indignity of blaming Ukraine in one sense and still giving Ukraine money after acknowledging or believing, or at the very least, putting it on Ukraine that they blew up the pipeline. So yeah, when Donald Trump turns around and says, by the way, we want Greenland now. We want Greenland. Is he serious? Well, the papers say he is. Whether he gets it or not, secondary to the point. I'm just pointing out that it is pretty astonishing that a US president comes out and says, we now want territory. No, it's not ours. No, we have no right to it, but we want it. We're protecting freedom. We're freedom and democracy. That's what we are. We're freedom personified. And in order for all of you to remain free, we need Greenland. It's just astonishing. Just utterly and entirely astonishing. So yeah, that is floating about. That is some of the stuff that is going on. One of the other interesting things, Donald Trump or Putin has responded to Donald Trump's indication that he wants to meet. And Putin has said that he also wants to meet. Now, they both have pointed out that this meeting is not necessarily, it's not something that can happen before Trump gets in office because he doesn't have the mantle of president, nor would it be right for it to do so before he gets into office. But clearly, this meeting is going to take place. Putin says he's open to it. Trump says he's open to it. It's going to take place, especially with this notion of Trump saying he wants to end the war. Now, I have a fondness for this. I was at, as I pointed out before, the first meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, between Trump and Joe Biden. I'm sorry, between Putin and Joe Biden on the Geneva summit. It was fascinating. It was my first political event that I covered. And I'm sitting there wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, hopeful, optimistic. Oh, these guys are going to come together. Something great is going to happen in this meeting. This is going to be fantastic. And my boss was sitting there with me, Russian, or Georgian, I'm sorry, but basically working for Sputnik. And he's looking with this kind of, totally cynical, completely cynical. And I am hopeful, annoying the hell out of him with my hopefulness. And, at a certain part of the meeting, at the end of the meeting, you had this interesting situation where Putin and Joe Biden are speaking to their respective sides. Joe Biden comes out with a list because, as we know, Joe Biden's mind wasn't all that right. And so he had to choose the people who he was going to talk to. And even in that choice, though, it became very clear that the messaging that was coming out of Joe Biden and the messaging that coming out of Putin were very similar, especially with this notion of we're going to set up meeting groups, we're going to have these talks, we're going to keep open lines of communication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even to the point of one of the media guys going after Joe Biden, acting like, did you give Putin the business? Did you tell Putin this? Did you tell Putin that? In which case, Joe Biden flipped out and was like, you don't understand. You don't get it. And what Joe Biden was trying to get across to him that he didn't get, or that he didn't quite understand, was that this could end the world. This is not tiddlywinks. We're not sitting here playing a game of Monopoly. We're talking about countries that are nuclear powers that could end the world several times over. There's a reason that much of the modern wars that take place, they use proxies. Because if the main nations get involved, all things end. Joe Biden knows that. Putin knows that. And I would imagine Chinese leaders and other leaders that hold nuclear weapons know that, especially from the standpoint of the two major preeminent nuclear powers on the planet. There's a responsibility associated with having that much power. And in that conversation, that was Biden's point to that reporter that the reporter didn't necessarily get. Now, fast forward, it didn't last. It didn't last at all. In fact, the conflict escalated to a point where Joe Biden crossed, for the most part, nearly all of his red lines, even up to the point of losing the election and continuing to escalate on some level to seemingly try to screw over the new administration that is coming in after Joe Biden. So, for what it's worth, it was a good experience, but it was an experience that apparently came to naught. The reason I bring that up is because now we have the situation where Donald Trump has said he is open to meeting Trump. I'm sorry, Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. The train is screwing with me. There's sound in the background. Anybody that has done videos, like if you've done YouTube, if you've done radio, TV, when there is noise in the background, it screws you up. You are in this kind of flow of consciousness. And when there's something going on, like knocking or somebody talking or something going on, it totally screws up that flow. It throws you off. Look, I guess my point is this: to put a button, put a pin in it. In the same way that Trump or that Joe Biden met Putin, Trump is now going to meet Putin. And in the first meeting, where they spoke, they came across in very similar ways in that meeting, at the end of that meeting, even though it came for naught. This meeting is going to take place. But Donald Trump is sounding different going into the meeting with a more honest awareness of the reality of events. What I mean by that is this. I played this before. I'm going to play it one more time, and I probably will play it for Scott when he gets here. But when Donald Trump was asked about it, he said this. And, you know, as I pointed out before, the most honest
said that's been
of this, of anyone in the political space that I've heard up to this point.
So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that's been like written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now. They can never join NATO. Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal, and then Biden broke it. They had a deal which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO. So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that's been like written in stone.
Yes. Yes. All of that. Yes. Everything you just said there was true. And even pointing out that Joe Biden effectively sabotaged the negotiations that were going to take place. Because all things being equal, you know, when the war first started, they were negotiating in Istanbul. Now, understand, you know, the negotiations went even before the Istanbul agreements. There were the Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements were fundamentally ignored. You got the situation of the Istanbul agreements after the war started. And they were coming to conclusions and agreements about a framework for that negotiation, meaning Ukraine and Kiev wanted to and was willing to negotiate. Otherwise, the framework wouldn't have been created. The agreements that they were going with would not have been agreed upon. Naftali Bennett was one of the people that was aware of those negotiations and pointed out that, yes, Kiev was coming to agreements. And you even had people who were in Ukraine itself, meaning some of the leadership, saying, yes, there were agreements that were being made. It was Boris Johnson that jumps in and scuttles it from the standpoint of the West. Victoria Nuland even admitted that they scuttled the agreement because they didn't necessarily like the fact that Ukraine was coming to some level of agreement. So there is that. Oh, good. I guess it's here. We're going to continue this conversation. I am joined by the one and only Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing okay. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, man. I was telling the audience back during when Joe Biden first got in, there were concerns that there was coordination, or there was a lack of coordination, or lack of knowledge, or communication between the United States and Russia, and that they had the Geneva summit. I was at that summit. I had the opportunity to cover that summit for the station. And, as I was telling the audience, when Joe Biden came out that summit, there were all of these agreements. There were all of these talks about what they were going to do. And I got to be honest, I had just started at the network. I was somewhat optimistic listening to them coming out saying, hey, these guys sounding like they're saying the same thing. And then fast forward, not so much, where Joe Biden has gotten to the point where he's escalated to a certain level of absurdity, even to the point of seemingly trying to cripple or handicap Donald Trump as he comes into office. I want to bounce to the Ukraine war for a bit, but I do want to get to that part. Putin has said he's open to having these talks with Trump. Trump has said he's open to having these talks with Putin. More likely than not, these talks are going to take place. What is going to be the main point of contention here? How do you think? In fact, before I get to that point, I want to go back for a bit. I'm going to go to the war first, and I want to build up to that because it doesn't quite make sense to go in that direction. Zelensky is doubling down in Kursk, and I have yet to find the military significance of this attack. He's getting thousands of people killed in an area that seemingly has no military significance. What is the point of this?
Well, remember that war is an extension of politics by other means. So if you're looking for a military significance in terms of, is this a brilliant flanking maneuver that's going to surround Russian forces and cause the collapse of? No, that's not what this is. This is a very, very expensive gambit on the part of the Ukrainians. Politically, though, this attack has extreme strategic potential for Ukraine, at least from the way the Ukrainians and I believe they're British masters. I believe this is part of Britain's, the MI6 and the British General Staff have a plan in place that they're implementing. Keep Ukraine in the fight. That's the whole purpose. How do you keep Ukraine in the fight? How do you prevent Ukraine from collapsing? And one of the concepts is to enable Ukraine to leverage specific actions and capabilities into negotiating potential that would empower Donald Trump to be more aggressive against Putin, rather than Trump coming into a negotiation, looking and saying, well, Putin has all the cards, so I'm going to be a little defensive here and, take what I can get, but understand that Putin has the advantage. I can't push back. The idea is to enable Trump to say, to Putin, hey, you've lost your own territory. Kursk, I mean, you can't just expect, you tell us to deal with military realities. Well, the military reality right now is that Ukraine occupies part of Kursk. And if you want this war to end based upon military realities, then the line's going to be that you lost Russian territory and you apparently can't take it back. So, yeah, Vlad, how do you want to deal with this now? We're offering you an opportunity to bring it into the war, but that's the fantasy world that the British and the Ukrainians live in. The reality is, if you ever tried to pull that with a Russian negotiator, they'd say, well, Dalai, let's continue. Please, we shall continue this war, and we'll see how it ends. That's the advantage Russia has, because no matter how you play this out, Russia is going to win. But politically, I mean, the Ukrainians advanced in August, and here we are in January, and they're still in Kursk. It's not a militarily significant thing. In fact, they've burned up their reserves, but they're trying to play for the political angle that empowers negotiations by focusing on, Putin's own rhetoric that he's ready for negotiations, but it must deal with the present realities. And the present reality that Ukraine is trying to present is we occupy part of Kursk.
Well, Russia said they're not going to negotiate around this issue of Kursk at all. And at this point, these people seem to be encircled. And on top of that, like talking about the military realities, Karamovo has fallen, Petrovsk is being surrounded. Russia is clearing out the Donbass. It seems that within 2025, Donbass is going to be cleared. Ukraine, as you pointed out, this is very expensive. Where are we on the battlefield currently in regards to the dynamics of the war?
I mean, on the battlefield, all advantages accrue to Russia. They continue their violent assaults on Ukrainian defenses, and they're having greater and greater successes all along the line of contact as the reality of the fact that Ukraine lacks meaningful reserves capable of plugging holes or launching effective counterattacks. Basically, all the Ukrainians can do right now is delay, put up enough resistance to slow down the Russian advance before they are compelled to withdraw back or die. And that appears to be the play that's repeating itself all along the battlefield. The Russians, are they've gone from this past summer. I remember Ukrainians mocking the Russians. Yeah, great. You're advancing. Your great Russian army is advancing hundreds of meters a day. At this rate, it'll be 2056 before Russia reaches the border. Things like that. I mean, they're like, yay, the Russians are doing so good, but they missed the point. The game wasn't territorial acquisition. The game was attrition, to wear the Ukrainians down to the point that you've reached just this situation where the Ukrainians are on the verge of collapse. And you'll see is the Russians, if they take Pokrovsk, and I believe they will, the road to Kramatorsk is wide open. The road, I mean, you're at some point in time when these fortress cities fall, there's nothing behind them. And, right. And then you're going to see, instead of, because today the Russians are advancing, kilometers a day. Mm-hmm. And at some point in time, when it collapses, you're going to see the Russians advance tens of kilometers a day. And that suddenly, that's it. Once the Ukrainians leave their, what is basically still a cohesive defensive line, even though the Russians are able to achieve, specific superiority at specific points on the line, there still is cohesion on the part of the Ukrainians. The Russians don't have free hand. Remember, everything that the Russians are accomplishing is being done through the sweat and blood of Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers aren't waking up in the morning, have a cup of tea, say, "Oh, jolly good boys, let's go for a stroll today and see how far we can get." They're waking up, and there's Ukrainians waking up in trenches and in tree lines and in basements, and the Russians have to go in and dig them out. They have to call in the aircraft. They have to call in the artillery, and the Ukrainians are calling in their own artillery and sometimes their own aircraft. And it's a war. It's bloody. It's violent. There's casualties on both sides. So even though we sit here and say, well, the Russians have the advantage on the front line and all that stuff. If you're the Russian soldier there in the front line, all you know is, yeah, you're advancing, but they're fighting back. And then if you make the wrong move, you're dead. There's minefields. Every once in a while, those FPV drones get through, and apparently that's the scariest thing in the world, to be the target of an FPV drone. Is you hear the buzzing sound come in, and you're powerless to do anything. And it's a new concept of war. The Russians are experiencing this. This is not easy. People need to understand what's happening on the front line, even though the Russians is not easy. There's nothing easy about this. But the Russians have the ability to make it. One thing the Russians are very good at is rotating forces, because combat is, it's exhausting for these guys. For the Ukrainians, they're coming in, they're not getting effective rotations. Their troops are coming in and they're stuck in a defensive position. They're just becoming physically exhausted to the point where they're almost zombie-like. The Russians fight to that point of exhaustion. Then they get rotated out, and the next unit comes in. And the people that rotate out get to go to prepared positions where they get to sleep, they get to eat. Some of them get to go home on leave. They rejuvenate themselves until it's their turn to be rotated back in. So the Russians maintain effective rotations to keep this pressure going. The Ukrainians, they try to do rotations, but it's very difficult with the Russians, having superiority in the air, Russians having intelligence superiority, gathering the intelligence about how the Ukrainians are moving their troops. So the Russians are doing a better job of breaking up the Ukrainians. That's just another factor into how difficult this is for the Ukrainians, because not only do they have insufficient resources, but the resources they do have are just exhausted. They're tired. Their equipment isn't well maintained. That's why they're being pushed back every single day.
I want to get into some of the larger politics of this for a moment. There has been talk. I want to play this clip. This is Donald Trump. And, this is the first time that I've heard somebody actually speak about Ukraine in a sane, rational way. And it gives me a bit of hope that Trump is going to try to stick to his word in regarding to end the war. I mean, the question is always how. I want to get your take on this statement. This was in one of his recent press conferences.
So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that that's been like written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now. They can never join NATO. Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal and then Biden broke it. They had a deal which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO.
Give me your take on that. I mean, for one, it's sane, it's rational. It's the first time I've heard somebody in the political space say something that was actually true in a sense. But give me your take on it.
Well, first of all, Donald Trump has to be careful. He's going to get banned from YouTube. Because me saying the same thing is one of the reasons why I got banned from YouTube. God forbid Trump talk about Bucha and he comes out and says, well, Ukraine did it. Oh, yeah. You're done. You're tossed, man. You can't. No, too much truth. Look, it's what he's saying is factually accurate. And the fact that he not only recognizes it, but is articulating this publicly is a big deal because, reality, that's the reality that's going to shape his approach to discussions with the Russians.
Exactly.
I always have to push back on this and remind people that Trump was, after all, president from January 20th, 2017 up until January 20th of 2021. And what did he do to stop NATO expansion in Ukraine? He inherited a very aggressive policy from the Obama administration. Now, I know that he had talks with Zelensky and there was, he disrupted the flow of arms until he got assurances about a corruption and things of that nature, got him impeached. You remember the perfect phone call. But, the United States had a operation on way since 2015 through 2022. There's 4 years in there where Trump was president, where NATO's job was to train the Ukrainian army to be prepared to physically remove the Russians from Donbass. And this was done by NATO while Trump was president. So I think there's, when he is criticizing the Biden administration, it's fair to criticize them. But he's ignoring the fact that he had 4 years to effect change so that American policy wasn't the expansion of NATO into Ukraine, because that was the policy under Trump, and he didn't change that policy. Now, I got some pushback from other people when I brought this up, and they rightfully say that, what did you want Trump to do? The moment he came in office, he was attacked by the Democrats, by the Republicans, right, by Congress, everybody, Russian collusion, this fake FBI investigation, the whole thing. it made it difficult. It didn't give him much maneuver room. So there is that, and we don't know what the dynamic was inside Team Trump about Russia, how they felt constrained. We also know that his own national security team, Vindman on the National Security Council, and Ciarella, this rogue CIA operative, the deputy national intelligence officer, were conspiring, probably illegally and unconstitutionally, with each other and with Adam Schiff to bring down. So his own team was stabbing him in the back. So there were a lot of constraints. So I think on this one, it's probably best to give Trump a pass on those 4 years and not get bogged down in that and focus on where he's at today, because he has made, this is a big deal that the president of the United States is saying what he's saying right now, because it is reality. And when the Russians want to sit there and say, we need to talk about the present reality, and one of Russia's, fundamental demands is Ukraine will never be part of NATO, and how that, how you guarantee that through treaty, et cetera, is a big part of bringing this conflict to an end. So this is a very, very big statement. And it also shows that Trump is listening to people. I don't know exactly who's getting through to him. Keith Kellogg, this didn't come from Keith Kellogg. This came from somebody else, somewhere else. And I don't want to name names, but I will name one. Douglas McGregor is somebody who has influence, who has in the past, his voice has been, accessible to Trump in an advisory capacity. And if you take a look at, the things that Douglas McGregor has been saying about Ukraine and this issue, you'll see now that there's some alignment with what Trump is saying. So either Trump is listening to him directly, or somebody else close to Trump is and advising Trump. But it seems that Trump is starting to develop an awareness about the reality of this conflict, so much so that he's no longer talking about solving the war with one phone call. He acknowledged today that the conflict may not be resolved for 6 months, which is a very accurate statement, because even if you begin negotiations with the Russians today, understand there will be no ceasefire. The Russians will continue, and you're either going to give the Russians what they want at the negotiating table, or the Russians are going to take it militarily. And I think the reason why this is going to take 6 months is that Trump needs to not just convince the Russians to bring it into the war, but needs to convince NATO, Europe, and Ukraine the need to bring it into a war on terms acceptable to Russia. And Trump, one of the cards Trump may play is as NATO and Europe and Ukraine resist, Trump basically say, well, then, it's your job to stop the Russians. We're not going to stop the Russians. We're not intervening. We're not escalating. We're telling you what needs to happen here because of this reality. You continue to articulate policies that seek to inject NATO into Ukraine. See, this is fatal to NATO, and the fact that Trump has come out and recognized this is fatal to NATO and European efforts in Ukraine, all of which hinge on eventual NATO membership. That's not going to happen now. And so if you can't achieve that, then why are you continuing to pour resources in? And it's going to take some time for Europe and NATO to be compelled to make these decisions. But it's not a one phone call job anymore in Trump's mind. He recognizes the complexities and he recognizes the realities. We'll see. He's not president yet. All we have is words. We don't have any action. Has he put together a team capable of taking his words and turning it into effective policy? We'll find out.
Oh, that is the question. I'll give you another name, RFK Jr. When he's spoken about the war, and apparently he listens to Alexander McCurris, who echoes many of the same sentiments. So, yes, somebody is clearly in his ear. This is the most articulate I've heard him on this. There is one thing, though. Do you think, did Europe and the U.S. sleepwalk into this, or did they go into this intentionally? And the reason I ask this, so William Burns had the memo, net means net. And in the memo, I've shown and read this memo before, but just for the audience members who have never seen this memo, this was the WikiLeaks memo by current CIA Director William Burns. This happened in 2008. It says Ukraine and Georgia's NATO aspirations not only touch a raw nerve in Russia, it engenders serious concerns about the consequences for stability in the region. Not only does Russia perceive encirclement and efforts to undermine Russia's influence in the region, but it also fears unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences, which would seriously affect Russia's security interests. Experts tell us that Russia is particularly worried that strong divisions in Ukraine over NATO membership, with much of ethnic Russian community against membership, could lead to a major split involving violence or, at worst, a civil war. In that eventuality, Russia would have to decide whether to get involved, whether it wants to or not. Basically, that's a decision it doesn't want to have to face, and yet it's stuck with that decision. When William Burns put that out in 2008, everything in that memo effectively came to pass. And they kept pushing and they kept pushing. Did they push intentionally, knowing full well that this was going to provoke a war, with this idea that either Russia allows that encirclement to take place or they get involved into a war, but either of these eventualities are perfectly okay from the standpoint of the West? Like, meaning, was the policy that cynical, where they understood that the war was most likely going to take place?
I believe the answer is yes. That this very conflict that Burns is warning about here was the objective, and I'll tell you why I believe it. First of all, we have the history of CIA involvement in Ukraine that goes back to 1948. Where they made common cause with Galen's, the former German intelligence forces that operated in the East, who had connectivity with Stepan Bandera and maintained connectivity with the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. The CIA made common cause with this group to begin supplying weapons, training, communications, etc., to further this insurgency. So we've always sought to use violence as a means of undermining Soviet/Russian authority in Ukraine. When the Banderas were defeated 1954-55, the CIA went on to the long game. We began funding Ukrainian nationalism using groups in diaspora. Hundreds of thousands of Banderists fled to England, Australia, the United States, Canada, and we used these groups in diaspora to feed money and literature back into Ukraine to continue to empower Ukrainian nationalism, not because we believed in the glory of Ukraine, but because we were waiting for that moment when these nationalists will be able to move and take over. In 2004, 2005, if you remember, there was the color revolution, George Soros' orange revolution. And who Yushchenko became the president. But who won the election?
Yanukovych.
Bingo. And Yanukovych is the part of the Russian political reality. Not Russia, but the ethnic Russian political reality. That's where his base is. That was not the result that the CIA wanted. Vladimir Putin is in power. We need to bring him down. At that time, remember, 2004, 2005, that's when we're empowering the Navalny's, the Nemtsovs. We're creating this fake democratic opposition in Russia, and we want to trigger that. We trigger that with the color revolution in Ukraine, which is a CIA-backed operation where we enabled groups to come out and demonstrate, and we brought down an election won by Yanukovych, and we put in this nationalist group, but they failed. And by 2008, what Burns, the reality of Burns in 2008 is that there's going to be an election in Ukraine in 2010, and the ethnic Russians are going to win. And that means Yanukovych. You see, they may have defeated him they didn't defeat him at the polls. They stole an election. They brought in this nationalist who tried to make Stepan Bandera a national hero. Guys, that's the sort of the tell here, where people, that's not really a problem. Really? The new leadership said Stepan Bandera is a hero.
They made him a hero of Ukraine. That was the first thing they did.
Bingo. So it tells you their priorities and where their motivations are. And yet Yanukovych came back and won in 2010. And that was a big problem because at that point in time, this anti-Russian cabal in the United States And again, I just want to remind you, there is a Russian mission center at the CIA whose job is to bring down Russia. When I say bring down Russia, their job is to create the conditions where Russia has economic collapse, societal collapse, political collapse, the end of Russia, to break Russia up into its constituent parts. That's their mission. That's their job. Oh, yeah, it was their job under Donald Trump, too, and he didn't stop it. I just want to point that out. When the CIA created 20 bases inside Ukraine, many of those bases were put in during Donald Trump's administration. So, you know, he again, that's why I have trouble giving him a total pass, because it's like, well, boss, you did this. But in 2014 wasn't just the Maidan to put in a nationalist government. This is what people have to understand. What happened in 2014 was supposed to be the political destruction of Yanukovych and his party, and then to move on to destroy once and for all the political viability of the ethnic Russian population of Ukraine. The Ukrainian nationalists declared war against the Russians, and it's a war that isn't. It's more of cultural and ethnic genocide as opposed to actual physical genocide, although they weren't opposed to killing Russians. But the idea was to eliminate the Russians as a political force that could challenge this government that the United States wanted to put in that would facilitate NATO moving into Ukraine. Why? To create the conditions of a war by proxy, a war that NATO would provide the weaponry and the training, and Ukraine would provide the manpower, and they would chew the Russians down to achieve not Ukrainian. That's the other thing. We never did this to get Ukrainian, a wonderful, glorious Ukraine. Ukraine was just a tool to be burned up in a war of proxy to bring down the Russians. We were going to sacrifice Ukraine all along, and we have successfully sacrificed Ukraine. But this has been the strategy all along. And again, look at the dates that I'm talking about. This begins in 2014. The fighting goes into 2015. That's when Minsk Accords comes in. Trump becomes president in 2017. If Trump understood all this, all he had to do is say, implement Minsk. But under the Trump administration, they maintained the line put forward by the Germans and the French and the Ukrainians that Russia is not, Russia's the problem. We're not the problem. But it's not Vladimir Putin who's come out and said, yeah, our entire approach to Minsk was a fraud, a sham. We were buying time to do what? Invade Ukraine. No, Putin was like, we want peace. We want Minsk to be implemented. We're not out for territorial acquisition. We're not absorbing the Donbass. We're saying the Donbass is part of Ukraine. All you have to do is protect the rights of the Russians. The rights of the Russians. But that was never the plan. That's why they could never go, because the plan was to eradicate the rights of the Russians, to nullify Russians as a political force in Ukraine. That was the plan. That was the American plan, German plan, French plan. It was always a sham, Minsk. Russia didn't want that. But that's the history going on here. This was always about creating a war. Again, the U.S. Army put out a slide, describing what they were doing in terms of the training, and they brag about it. They point to the base. They say, we train 1 battalion of Ukrainian troops every 55 days here. And then they have an arrow so they can go and fight the Russians here. And I'm like, well, that's sort of like, and that slide was made under the Trump administration. This has always been the goal and objective. The plan is going along perfectly, except for one thing. Russia's not cooperating. I mean, when Russia has, the entire West sanction it, Russia must cooperate and collapse economically. Russia, how dare you stand up and actually improve your economy? Socially, Russia must collapse socially. The society must turn against its leadership and recognize this conflict as a illegal invasion. But that didn't work. Putin just won an election last year that was dominating in terms of the approval that he has of the Russian people for what he's doing in Ukraine. It's not that they want this war to go on forever. They want this war to end. but they're not going to let this war end on terms that aren't acceptable to Russia. Politically, how can Russia allow this 25-year reign to continue? I mean, my God, it must collapse. As Joe Biden said, that man must go. Well, Joe, bye-bye, you're gone. He's still there. So, the Russians just aren't playing the game right. Their military isn't supposed to be winning. They're supposed to be trapped right now in this war that is just chewing up resources and demoralizing the Russians and bankrupting the Russians and putting Putin in a political corner. And Russia's supposed to be shaking at its foundations so that when Donald Trump comes in, he huffs and he puffs and he blows the house down. That ain't happening. This ain't straw. This ain't wood. This is a brick house that Russia has built, and the big bad wolf can't blow it down. And NATO has lost the big gambit. And this was an all-in gambit. This is that. Do you ever watch the Vegas poker, Texas Hold'em stuff on TV every once in a while? The one where the guys got his sunglasses on, and I don't think they can smoke at tables, but he's sitting there, and finally he's looking at his cards and he all in. It's everything, the whole thing, and everybody's, oh my God, all in. Well, NATO went all in on this. This isn't something where you lost a little pot and you pull back and you NATO went all in, and when they lose, it's the end of NATO. And I honestly believe that NATO is not long for this world. Donald Trump will be the man who administers the last rites over the NATO corpse. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. There was a train in the background. I was trying to kill the sound.
Hey,
one of the other things that is interesting in this has to do with, as I was pointing out before, the Geneva summit that Joe Biden went to. Well, at some point, Trump and Putin are going to meet. I mean, they have both said that they wanted to meet. I would imagine this meeting at some point is going to take place. Whether it takes place in 100 days, whether it takes place sooner, who knows? But it's going to take place. How, given the Minsk agreements, given the Istanbul agreements, given even going out to something like the JCPOA or the nuclear agreements that they got rid of in regards between Russia and the United States, meaning the U.S. scrapped all of these agreements and have shown no propensity to maintain any kind of deal that they set. So how, regardless of any kind of meeting that Donald Trump has with Putin, how does this end? And how does this end in a way where Russia is assured that Ukraine remains neutral, Ukraine is not a part of NATO, et cetera, with the other conditions of ensuring the Russian population is maintained, all of their denazifying Ukraine, not building up a military on whatever's left of Ukraine. Like how do you come to some kind of deal and agreement considering all of the other agreements that were scuttled? I guess I'm asking, how do you actually end this war?
I mean, that's a great question. I will tell you, again, I can't speak on behalf of Russia, but I've talked to enough Russians at enough levels to have an idea of their approach. I mean, we've seen it himself. Putin has talked about, each president coming in wanting to do something different, wanting to do something new, and then, at the end of the day, the men with the dark suits and the briefcases come in and brief them on the reality, and they're stuck. The problem with that Putin scenario, which is not a wrong one, is that this isn't Trump's first rodeo. Okay, he's been in the Oval Office when the men in the dark suits come in with the dark ties and the briefcases and read reality, and he understands that he recognizes that they're the problem. That's the speech he gave in September in Texas. The biggest threat to the United States is the United States by implementing these bad policies. Yep. So the men in the dark suits aren't going to be coming into his office this time. They're not welcome. He doesn't need them. He's done this before, and he's going to do it his way. One of the things, again, watching The Apprentice, I don't mean to do this to you guys, but as an intelligence officer, it's my job to try and figure out thought patterns and behavioral patterns, et cetera. I do the same thing when I evaluate other leaders. The Apprentice is a very telling, expose on how Donald Trump operates. And, he creates competitive environments to get a winner and a loser. He would get these corporate teams together and they would compete. But the best part of the show is when he brings the losing team in and they dissect why they lost. And Trump starts asking very specific questions. The man ain't stupid. And it shows that he has ability to dissect defeat and learn from it. His first administration was a defeat. He didn't get what he wanted. And I believe Trump has dissected that internally and learned from it and is putting together a new team, like you want in The Apprentice, a new team to come in and do this stuff. So I think right there you have a vehicle for change that the Russians may not have recognized yet. Because I'll tell you, when Anatoly Antonov was the ambassador here, I had the honor and privilege to meet with him a couple times and over lunch and stuff and have meaningful conversations. We talked about negotiation because he was the START treaty negotiator, New START treaty. He sat down across from Rose Gutemuller and was lied to by the United States. The big thing was that the Russian goal was to blend the New START treaty, strategic arms limitations and reductions, with ballistic missile defense. And that's the Russian goal. And the United States under Obama said, you got to separate the two. Remember the famous or infamous scene in South Korea where Obama and Medvedev were each other, and Obama off mic, thought he was off mic. He said, "Hey, I got an election coming up.
Yeah,
get through this election, then I'll have
Mike
defense." And Medvedev went, "Well, you're sincere, man. I believe you." He was lied to. Obama lied to him. Then they lied to him. We had no intention of having flexible on missile defense. What Obama wanted to do is solidify the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty because it was in the strategic advantage, because we lied in the negotiations about how to demobilize B-52s and Trident submarines. We lied because the goal was temporarily demobilize, but in the times of crisis you could reverse that and get your numbers up quickly. And the Russians didn't realize that the Americans were disingenuous until after the treaty was in. They're looking at it going, that's not really demobilized, that isn't demilitarized. All you have to do is connect that wire and you're back up. You're supposed to pour concrete into this thing. All you did is put a lock on it. How does that? And the Americans are like, no, the treaty is not specific in this. And the Russians were like, in Medvedev, I remember talking to Anatoly Antonov, and he went, we were too trusting on the intentions of the United States, that we believe that the United States was sincerely looking for mutually, basically a treaty that affected each side mutually, but what it turned into is a treaty that the United States was seeking strategic advantage over the Russians, and then they kept out the missile defense part. And I remember when Anatoly Antonov said, okay, so we did the treaty based upon what the United States wanted, and then I waited, and then I picked up the phone call and I called Rose and I said, I'm ready. We're ready to begin the negotiation. I have a team ready to go to Geneva to talk. And she went, that ain't going to happen. And that's when he realized that the United States is a bunch of liars. Now, but what he said is, we can't live in a world where we don't negotiate with the United States. And all of our negotiations have to end, to be valid, have to end in a treaty, in writing.
Right.
He said, so we know this. We know that even though the United States has this horrible track record, to move forward in peace, there has to be treaties in writing. He said, we are going to make sure that these treaties contain everything we need. We'll be unyielding on this. We will, create mechanisms that aren't just about verification, but also mechanisms that tie the Americans in, that make it hard for the Americans to withdraw. So they recognize this. But the other thing that is to their advantage, all these agreements that were nullified, how many of them were Donald Trump's agreements?
None that I'm aware of.
And Donald Trump always starts, it's, again, part of his psychology, man. I've been following the guy. These were bad deals. These are bad deals because they were bad negotiators. You've heard him say it over and over again. He just said it right there. This was a bad negotiation. This was a bad deal. That's the reality. Trump's coming in saying, I'm not those guys. I'm Donald Trump. I'm a good negotiator. We're going to negotiate a good deal. And once I negotiate a deal, I stick with the deal because it's a good deal. You only go against the deals when they're bad deals, but I'm going to negotiate a good deal. So we'll see. I do think that there's a window of opportunity here because Trump is something new. And you see the way that Putin speaks about him. Putin I mean, it's so obvious to it should be obvious, but Trump wins the election. And instead of being pragmatic and everything, Putin's like, the way that man took a bullet in Butler, Pennsylvania. I mean, my God, he went to the ground, he came up, and I looked at him, and he was full of strength, and that Trump's sitting there going, more, baby, more. Oh yeah, that feels good. Because and Putin's doing it on purpose. He's basically saying this is a good guy, a man of honor, a man we could possibly work with. We could, as opposed to senile old Joe Biden, who's a liar. And that's the thing too, that Joe Biden, we get back to Geneva. Joe Biden straight out lied to Vladimir Putin. Straight out lied to him. The biggest thing he lied about was wanting peace. Vladimir Putin told Joe Biden, and you recall this, that Minsk was a big deal. Putin was trying to pressure Biden to say, you have to take action on Minsk. And Biden promised Putin, you were there, you know this, he said, I will instruct Tony Blinken to get Minsk back on track. This is going to be our priority. Because Putin said, you want the troops to stop moving along the border in Russian territory, so it's really none of your business. But if you want that to stop, then Minsk will solve it all. The interesting thing is, while the Russians were continually meeting with the Germans and the French afterwards saying, hey, have you gotten that call from Blinken yet? Did Tony call you? Tony's supposed to give you a call and tell you something. And they're like, no, we haven't gotten a call. Blinken just admitted in September that he was secretly transferring weapons to Ukraine. So at a time when Blinken is supposed to be working on Minsk and all that, he knows that they have no intention of doing Minsk, that it was a lie, and he begins the secret transfer of weaponry to Ukraine because they know there's going to be a war. They know it. They know that they're not going to do what they promised to do to prevent a war, so that there will be a war. And the Russians picked up on that in October. They confronted the French and the Germans about Minsk. We're told we're not going to pressure the Ukrainians. So Russia just jumped out of Minsk. In September, Russia puts the 2 draft treaties forward saying, okay, Minsk is dead. This is the new framework. Forget about Minsk. There's no Minsk 3. This is the new framework. And NATO and the United States ignored it. And now we have the war. Why? They wanted the war all along. This is the question that you started out with. The United States and NATO wanted this war all along. It is a necessary action to achieve the strategic vision of bringing down Russia, which is the goal number one. And Trump is going to have to address that. Trump is going to have to show the Russians that that is no longer the policy of the United States. The Russians have said, and Anatoly Antonov, how can we talk to you? What is the basis of our discussion? Jamal, if you and I are neighbors, and I said, look, they say, Scott, what do you want? I want Jamal out of his house. I want him out. I want him in the streets. I want him homeless.
And let's negotiate from there. Yeah.
And Jamal, what do you want? I want to live in peace and live in peace and harmony with my neighbors. All right, let's sit down at a table and negotiate.
There's no negotiation on that.
There's no negotiation. You're going to sit there and go, no, he's not willing to bid on this. And so the Russians are saying, wait a minute. So you've articulated that your objective is the strategic defeat of Russia. And I just want to remind people what strategic defeat of Russia means. It means that Russia's destroyed economically. And again, for everybody out here, let me just put it in human terms. That means you don't have a job. It means you don't feed your family. That means that you don't have it. Your life is over as you know it. And then that leads to societal collapse. Now, America hasn't had societal collapse since the Great Depression. Well, we had some inner cities, I guess we could say there's societal collapse in Appalachia. Okay, so we have isolated incidents of societal collapse. But the fact is, our society hasn't gone straight to hell. Russia has. They remember what the 1990s was. That was societal collapse. And we want that to happen again. That's our goal and objective, to bring Russia down to the worst period of its history since World War II, where millions of people died. Americans don't realize that. Millions of people died of alcoholism, suicide, of disease, of drug abuse, of just, the life expectancy rate plummeted because life became meaningless in Russia. That's what we want today when we say societal collapse and political collapse. We not just don't want Putin down, we want Russia broken apart. That is the objective. We don't want this great Russian Federation. We want it broken apart into individual constituencies that then we can use the divide and conquer technique to keep them all weak. That's what we want. That's our objective. That's the CIA's mission. And Trump wants to sit down with the Russians, and the Russians going, yeah, but the CIA works for you, don't they? Oh yeah, yeah. Their mission's still to bring us down. Yeah, don't worry. No, we are worried about that, because if that's their mission, that means you've told them that's still their mission, and we can't negotiate with you until you change that. And that's the reality. That's why they won't negotiate. Biden keeps saying, "Well, we want to meet with the Russians to talk about strategic weapons and arms control." And the Russians are like, "No, you want the strategic defeat, so we're not going to talk about the one thing that guarantees you will never defeat us, which is our strategic nuclear deterrence. That's there. You'll never defeat us, because if you do, we kill you all." So no, we're not negotiating that away. And so there's no talks. And the Russians won't talk with Biden. If Trump wants to have this talk, he's going to have to address the issue of the American objective of strategically defeating Russia.
Two last questions, Scott, before I let you go. One has to do with the Greenland thing. People have been talking about this. I've been fascinated by this, because whether he can accomplish it or not is almost secondary to the point of what is in his mind in talking about this. And I think part of this is this kind of recognition of the world is different. Like that, China by itself has like 3 times our industrial potential. You look at Russia, it is a major military power at this point that have shown itself to be strong enough to push back on the entirety of NATO. I think it's a certain level of insecurity, but I want to get your take. This is Trump talking about the Greenland thing.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up, because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen.
Give me a take on that. I know this, a plate for the Arctic, and those type of things. But what is your thought on this? I mean, like I said, whether you can get Greenland or not is almost secondary to the point. What do you think is in his mind on this topic?
I think Donald Trump is very much interested in creating Fortress America, an exclusive. It's interesting to hear this because this is his mind. This is sort of Russia. Russia saying, "Hey, we have this thing called the near abroad, the former Soviet republics, and we have a very important national security interest to keep the near abroad sort of close to us. It's about national security, and that's been rejected by the West. No, you can't do that. These are sovereign states. This whole thing.
Spheres of influence, yeah.
But Trump is about American national security interests, and that's interesting that he recognizes there's a need that we have interests that are outside of our borders that must go our way, or our national security is compromised. When you talk about Greenland, we have Thule Air Force Base there that has historically served a Cold War purpose. It's linked to a series of early warning stations, radar stations that protect us from ballistic missile attack from Russia. Not protect us, but allow early detection, things of that nature. But that again, these are relics of the Cold War. We now have overhead capability that does that job, and maybe even does it better. The big thing about Greenland right now is the climate change that's taking place, and the opening up of the Arctic now as a region for economic exploitation. There's a lot of minerals up there, rare earth minerals and exotics and things that can be, extracted from the ground. But then who controls it? You get the Northwest Passage and all this, the movement of ships. He's talking about ships. If Russia can move ships from, the Murmansk all the way across into Vladivostok and down the Pacific, draw that line and look how short that passage is compared to how they had traditionally have to go through the Suez Canal and around. Russia controls that, and it works the other way. And China wants to be a part of that too. Now look at the map and look where Greenland is in relationship to the Arctic Circle, the Arctic Sea, et cetera. And you see that Greenland is perhaps the most strategic territory for influencing development in the Arctic. And Trump says we can't trust that with Denmark. We need it ourselves. We need to be in control of this. And and then people say, well, how dare he? Well, here's the interesting thing. Even the Danish acknowledged that the people of Greenland have a right to select their own future. And there is a contingency in Denmark that allows for not just autonomy, but independence of these people if they have a referendum, if they vote in this direction. So Trump doesn't have to militarily occupy Denmark. All he has to do is go in and tell these 45,000 voters, life will be so much better under America than it is, because there's a lot of resentment in Greenland towards the Danish government. They view that it doesn't have their best interests in mind. I think there's a real shot that Trump's going to come in and we're going to own Greenland by the time his presidency's done. I give it about 100% certainty that's going to happen.
You think so?
Yeah.
You think so? I am.
Even hear the softening of the Danish position now. The Danish were over my dead body. Trump's like, okay. Well, I mean, what we meant was that we want to work with the population there. Trump's like, yeah, we're working with them too, better than you. But what we meant, there has to be a way. There's a softening of the position. And Europe is, we're going to go to war over this. Really? You're going to go to war? I mean, the French foreign minister talking about war with America. It's like, in what wet dream, excuse my language, do you possibly think that's going to come out well for France? America, here's the reality for Europe. I'm just going to give it to them in a heartbeat. We talk about how strong China is economically, et cetera. America can shut Europe off with a flick of the switch. Okay, we own your economies. We are your economies. Your economies don't work without us. And we can outlast you in every way, shape, and form. We can just pick you to die individually, or we can kill you collectively. I'm not bragging about this. There's people like, look, Scott's become such a capitalist warmonger. No, I'm just telling you the reality. And we now have a president in place who understands this reality. He doesn't back down. He doesn't believe in a sacred unity between us. He doesn't go to Europe and weep tears because of the cultural unity between two. He goes to Europe and you see it when NATO got together.
Humiliation.
I'm America. We push people away. That's Trump's approach. This is a new game, guys. This guy's coming in with a whole new mindset, and he doesn't view Europe as the long-lasting ally. You're the adversary. And the more the idiots in Europe say this stupidity, because again, Trump is a counter-puncher. So they're sitting there saying, France, Trump's response isn't to go, oh, well, let me sit down and consider your words carefully and see if we can come up. Trump's like, really? Boom. How you like that? Yeah, you want to do it again? That's Trump's approach. So if I were the Europeans, I'd be very careful, because Trump is ready to pull the plug on NATO today and watch the European Union collapse. He's not here to preserve the European Union, and he's definitely not here to preserve NATO, and he doesn't give a damn what anybody in Europe thinks, except maybe Giorgia Meloni.
She's got. I love that woman. I love that woman. Last question. 5% for NATO. So this feels like a mob boss to me, where the guy's like, he realizes how weak Europe is. I mean, because if you think about it, when Europe is paying the 2% for NATO, well, that money is coming for weapons for us. When we blew up Nord Stream and they had to buy all that oil or gas from us, again, that's them paying 5 times more to us. Those businesses that were being deindustrialized, they came to the United States. So it's like Europe has allowed itself for a huge amount of money to be flowing out of Europe into the US, which shows a certain level of weakness. And then Trump turns around and says, okay, now I want 5% for NATO, which they can't afford. So what is the point? Yeah, it's a shakedown. So why the shakedown all of a sudden? Is it just to humiliate Europe further? What's the purpose of this?
Well, Trump will have political pushback here in the United States about NATO. And so what Trump is going to do is create the conditions that NATO can't succeed, and then confront Congress and say, this is a dying body. It's on life support. I'm pulling the plug. I'm not going to sit here and pay medical bills for this this dead body. They're brain dead. It's time to say goodbye. And the way you do that is you confront NATO with the reality that the only reason why NATO is militarily viable today is because of American money.
That's right.
And if you turn to NATO and you say, "Nah, we're pulling back. You've got to step up," 5%. There's not a major NATO economy that can pull that off. Germany can't. Their last defense budget was shrinking. They couldn't even match inflation in terms of this. So their military is shrinking. France,
Yeah, they're
the
in a
same
recession.
thing. England, it's a joke. So
Yeah.
NATO can't do this. And the second that happens, you're going to see rebellion within the different ranks. If AFD does well in this election in February, that's a game changer right there. That's the beginning of the end for not just NATO but Europe, because they're honest about it. They say we don't want any of this nonsense. We don't want Ukraine. We want to get back to Russian gas, cheap energy, that makes our economy viable. This is the reality of Europe. It's moving in that direction as the political and economic elites that got them in this horrible situation, who sold their souls to America a long time ago, are now coming face to face with the fact that there's a new sheriff in town and he doesn't want to play that game. And they don't have a plan B. So it's be interesting. Europe is going to be an interesting story over the course of the next couple of years.
Those governments are going to collapse. I guess my thing is, why wouldn't, for the longest time, America has wanted this kind of power projection device in Europe, this kind of American way of controlling European economic politics. And if you think about it, it's even controlling their domestic politics, not just their foreign policy. So why wouldn't Trump want that ability to control Europe in this way, even if it's not in the context of the Ukraine war?
Trump's rejecting the underlying premise of all that, which is the empowerment of NATO. To empower NATO, you need a compliant Europe. To get NATO to do the bidding of the United States, Europe has to be a compliant singularity. That's what the European Union's job is to break down anybody who might protest against what America's trying to do.
Right.
But it's a policy designed to feed a strategy that is linked to the military-industrial complex and the need for forever wars to generate. Trump wants to break that. Trump has said, I don't want to do forever wars. That's not my model anymore. I'm not going to let the military-industrial complex dictate what happens abroad. I want to pull back. I don't want to be the world's policeman. I want to engage economically with the economic lead, not the military lead. So it's a whole different paradigm right now under Donald Trump. And unfortunately, Jamal, I have to run. I'm
sorry. I kept you long. I just wanted to get that last one in. Thank you, man. I really appreciate this, Scott. I'm sorry for keeping you this long.
No. It's a pleasure talking. I just have certain realities that are staring at me right now that I have to go deal with.
No, I do. I totally appreciate it. I thank you. I always appreciate your time, man. Thank you for this, Scott. The one and only Scott Ritter. He's a UN weapons inspector, weapons and mass destruction whistleblower. You can follow Scott on Telegram, actually. Yeah, I'm sorry for that. I didn't mean to keep him that long. I just wanted to get that last one in, the 5%. I have a list of questions that I wanted to hit Ritter with. I am so sorry. I hope he comes back. I hope he's not pissed off at me over that. I am going to send him an apology in order to thank him for that. Great conversation with Scott. And, the 5% thing, like I said, is fascinating. It's a shakedown. Hey, I need you to give me 5%. Now, they're not going to be able to do that. And so it becomes, okay, well, it's going to be interesting to see how that works. I predicted, I think it was last year or more, that these governments in Europe were going to collapse, that regardless of the propaganda that you give your populations, propaganda is one thing, reality is something else. And the population is not going to accept pain, discomfort, amelioration for Ukraine. They're just not going to do it. Especially, it's like you need to take cold showers. You need to have less public services. You need to have your businesses leave and lose your jobs. You need to have your grain drop in price in order to get Ukrainian grain in. Like, they're not going to accept this premise, whether they believe the reality of it, meaning whether they accept your propaganda or not. They're not going to accept the pain associated with it. I didn't believe they would. And as you see it, Macron's party collapse, Scholz's government collapse, Fico in office, Orban wins his seat. And the two big ones, if you look at the European Parliament, for example, the way it shifted in that last election in Europe didn't take the message to heart, and they kept along with the same policies. Okay, fair enough. What's going to happen in France? in 2027. Or, well, that's assuming Macron even makes it that long. And what is going to happen in Germany? These are going to be two fascinating polarities that's taking place, these kind of mainstays of Europe. And as Scott pointed out, the fact that Donald Trump seems to be putting screws to NATO is fascinating. We'll see. I mean, the first time around, I do give Trump somewhat of a pass the first time around because they kept saying that the man was working with the Russians. This time, meaning anything that he did was in the context of that box of the Russian stuff. This time around, it may be different. But I want to go to my guests. We are joined with the man of the hour, the man I definitely want to talk to, Daniel Lazar. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me. How are you doing this morning?
Just fine. How are you?
I'm doing great, better that you are with me. You have been my person to talk to about the events that were taking place in Europe, effectively European politics, because it has gotten rather fascinating, especially Georgia. So the Georgian prime minister who said she was never going to leave has left. I'm sorry, the Georgian president who said she was never going to leave has finally left. And all of the coup attempts and everything else, it seems that the Maidan 2.0 has effectively failed. Now, the government that's in place now is saying that they're going to look back at the previous government for crimes to see whether any crimes had taken place in the previous government. Apparently, the previous president or the previous prime minister is in jail, and they're looking back to see whether or not there's anybody else associated with the crimes that had taken place and whether or not there's anybody else that needs to be prosecuted. What's going on with this? I'm fascinated with Georgia just because of everything that's been taking place along the lines of former president, A, not wanting to leave, and B, trying to overthrow the government. I saw that in Ukraine, and you can see what was taking place in Ukraine when that happened. What is going on in Georgia around these prosecutions?
Well, yeah, the Ukraine comparison is appropriate. I mean, the two countries in certain respects are similar. The Ukraine is much bigger by a factor of 10, but nonetheless, it's a former Soviet state that broke away and where power has been seized by nationalists, pro-Western nationalists, anti-Russian, and the result was a brutal war, which is now, nearing its third anniversary. It's been horrible. Georgia is another state, and there's been a battle between pro-Western forces and pro-Russian forces, and the pro-Russian forces are now winning. They won an election in October pretty convincingly. There were weeks and weeks of protests that have now died away. The former president, whose name is Salome Zarabishvili. How's that for my?
Yeah, I didn't want to try to pronounce that.
She vowed not to step down, but has now stepped down. So the new government is stronger. It's pursuing an independent policy, and as part of that policy, it is launched an investigation into its former president named Mikhail
Saakashvili.
Yes, I'm sorry. And he was a neocon who became president in 2004 by virtue of a color revolution called the Rose Revolution in Georgia, and he imposed neoliberal policies, budget cuts, major budget cuts, all kinds of pro-market reforms, so-called. The results were pretty impressive initially. Although there was and also at the same time, there was strong economic growth, but also dramatic increases in economic polarization. And he blundered into a war with Russia over a breakaway province called South Ossetia, and got his butt kicked, to be put it as simply as possible. And he was then thrown out, but he then went to Ukraine, came back to Georgia, was involved in various kinds of no good activities, is now in jail in Georgia. The government is launching a criminal investigation into some of his less savory acts while he was in office. So it's an attempt to consolidate power, to see to it that the forces that lost the election remain out of power, do not try to disrupt activities, and that's what's happening. So they're trying desperately to avoid a Ukrainian outcome where they are dragged into a civil war, into a war with Russia that they cannot possibly remotely win, and they're trying to steer clear of that, and it looks like they may succeed. None of this is meant as an endorsement of the Georgian dream, the ruling party, which is very conservative in many respects, but they do seem to have popular backing, and they have a right to pursue an independent national policy.
Is it fair to say? I mean, I know people use the term pro-Russian, but is it pro-Russian or just nationalist? Meaning we care about our own self-interest and attacking or getting involved in wars, not enough self-interest. Meaning it's not so much pro-Russian, it's just pro-Georgia, if that makes sense. Or do you agree with that?
I agree with it totally. I mean, Georgia lives in the real world, just like the rest of us do. Mm-hmm. They're a country of, I think, 3.7 million people, next to a country of 170 odd million people, and they've got to get along. I mean, this is life. This is, if you're Canada, if you're Mexico, you gotta get along with that colossus in between, the U.S. The U.S. shouldn't bully those countries around, although in fact, of course, it does. But they've got to manage that relationship, and Georgia can't. It'd be insane for Georgia to provoke hostilities with Russia, in behalf of the United States, located 6,000 miles away. It would be insane. And so the Georgian government, the Georgian Dream Party, wants to avoid that outcome. They don't want to see themselves destroyed. They don't want to see a generation of young people, perish in the trenches.
Yeah, they're rational. It's just a rational act. Yeah,
does that make them cowards? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's the NATO point of view in this is like, hey, why don't you want to fight the Russians? And it's like, why would we want to do that? Like, it's not in our best interest. One of the other issues also is the election that's coming up in Germany. The Scholz government has collapsed. In the context of that collapse, the AfD is one of the parties that is shockingly, and I'm saying shockingly because, 10 years ago, this would be mind-blowing, just like Marine Le Pen's party. Like 10 years ago, it would be unheard of that you would be this close to political power. But the AfD has been, at the very least on the foreign policy front and in the energy front, sane for whatever, their anti-immigration stance. And that has gained a certain amount of popularity in Germany. And honestly, not just in Germany. I know this is not the AfD in Austria, but also the right-wing parties in Austria have also gained prominence due to issues of immigration and some of the foreign policy things that are taking place in Europe. The AfD, though, is fascinating. There was a conversation recently between an AfD leader and Elon Musk that is freaking Europe out. And, this gets to somewhat the weirdness with Europe, where they was talking about like all of these institutions that were studying the phone call and conversation with Elon Musk and the AfD leader to see if any kind of metrics in Twitter was taking place in order to boost it and stuff. Just utterly insane stuff. But what do you make of Elon Musk's, attack on these European leaders? Whether it's Keir Starmer, who's weak and hated in the UK, or whether it's Scholz in Germany, with these kind of conversations with the AfD leader. I've been fascinated with Elon Musk's, what is this? A taste of political power that has gone to his head, and the things that he's been saying and the kind of the aggressiveness that he's been taking against other world leaders. Give me a take on this. I mean, for one, I guess start off, do you think it's going to have any kind of effect in Germany that he's having a conversation with this leader? And for that matter, what do you think the AFD's chances are in Germany in this election in general?
Oh, it has a huge effect. First of all, by the way, I don't think that Keir Starmer is hated.
You don't think so?
No, I mean he's holding in there. He's has a base of support. He was elected by a plurality. I don't see him being especially unpopular. The economy is not doing well, but I don't see any kind of wellspring of anger, such as, for example, we've seen in Canada against Trudeau.
Yeah.
So I don't see him in the same position. I think what's happening, I think this is really fascinating and really important. There was a report out recently that the world's 500 richest individuals now have a collective wealth of $9.8 trillion.
Wow.
That's a lot of money. And 1.5 trillion of that is in the last year. So these ranks of the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, are feeling their oats, and they are backing Trump 110%.
Yeah.
And Trump is the billionaire's candidate. Elon Musk, by the way, one of the latest figures on his wealth, $450 billion. That's nearly $500 billion.
He's going to be the first $1 trillion man.
Yeah,
in a few years.
Astonishing. So he is so wealthy and so powerful in this ultra-capitalist atmosphere we're in that he thinks that he can use his money to overthrow governments, and overthrow governments not in some impoverished, African or Latin American country, but overthrow governments in the heart of the advanced industrialized world. Germany and Britain. It's extraordinary. The AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, is roughly speaking, a quasi-semi-Nazi party.
Yes.
With vehement anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant stances, and Musk is boosting them, and I think that in today's climate, that will carry a lot of weight. And he's also declared war on Keir Starmer, and I think in today's climate that carries weight as well. So I think that what we're seeing is these ultra capitalists flexing their muscle, using their financial power and translating that into political power. And I think it's extraordinary. I think we're seeing a blow off here, because I think the economy, the speculative economy, is extremely unstable. I think we're heading for a super 2008. But nonetheless, this money power is reaching extraordinary political dimensions.
I've never seen anything like it. Under normal circumstances, the billionaire class stays behind the scenes. Like the first time I saw a billionaire come out for political reasons was Bloomberg. When they were running in the race, Joe Biden wasn't doing all that well. Bloomberg gets in a race like he's going to be a savior for the Democratic Party. He spends $1 billion in a primary for like 6 months, gets humiliated, flames out. This is pretty shocking where these guys are coming from behind the scenes and saying, yes, we're putting $50 million into a political candidate, or, APAC, I'm putting $100 million into political candidates. Like, this is a massive amount of money where they are no longer kind of staying behind the scenes. They are actually coming to the forefront with their particular candidates. I've never seen anything like it. I guess the question for the AFD, please.
I think in 1924, if I'm correct, there was a boomlet about running Henry Ford for president.
Really?
And Henry Ford, I'm pretty sure this is correct. And Henry Ford was one of the richest men in the world at that time. This is at the height of the Model T, which were rolling off the assembly line, one a minute. So he was a fantastically wealthy guy by that point, and the U.S. in the 1920s was in the grips of this right-wing Republican political system, which worship money. What's good for GM is good for America. So therefore, there was a boomlet in his behalf. But this is far greater, far greater. This leaves that in the dust.
Well, do you think the AFD has a chance of winning this election?
I think it has a good chance of. I think they probably will strengthen their position and then emerge as a kingmaker. In other words, they will be able to determine the makeup of the next government. The next government will be an AFD influenced government. In Austria, the Freedom Party, which is the rough equivalent, is in the process of taking the lead in forming a new government. So that's pretty amazing. But Germany, of course, is a much bigger country. But yeah, I think the AFD will likely emerge as the kingmaker.
It's funny. I told my ex-girlfriend that was going to happen in Austria. She didn't believe me. And a year later, government collapses, the new government comes in, the right-wing government takes over. And again, this is not that I love it one way or the other. It's just Europe they have gotten so far ahead of their skis in regards to what it seems like the public wants. I mean, even in the European elections that took place, there was a sea change. And, at the end of the elections, when they started electing their members again, you get von der Leyen right back at the top. Despite the fact that all of these, it made a clear voice that they wanted something different in all of these countries in the European elections. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you think they're just not listening? Do you think that these change of governments, whether it's the AFD, whether it's Le Pen or that party gaining more seats, whether you think it's Meloni in Italy, do you think that the fact that these governments seems to be changing is going to affect the larger politics of the European Union? Or do you think for the most part, the orthodoxy is going to remain in control?
Oh, no, I think it'll have an effect, a big effect. The EU politics are buffered. The people like von der Leyen are indirectly related, so they sort of carry on despite what's happening at the base. But that doesn't go on indefinitely. Eventually, she'll feel the heat and will wind up succumbing. So yeah, I would think that it'll change the politics of the EU and will change the politics of NATO too. That's really important. I mean, NATO is in crisis. I mean, because you have Donald Trump.
He's raising their rent 5%. I mean, he's raising their
yeah. First, Joe Biden blew up Nord Stream, and now Donald Trump is declaring war on Denmark.
Yeah.
So NATO.
So I think just for the audience can hear that comment, to give some kind of context in case, they were living under a rock and they hadn't heard Donald Trump say this. He basically was at the press conference and was saying, hey, we need Denmark for our national security. We believe in freedom. And we need, to protect the free world. Let's play.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You don't even need binoculars.
I love this notion. I do this to protect the free world. That's why we need it. We need you to give it to us to protect the free world. What do you make of this? I mean, and are we in this kind of new era of gangster politics? Is that what's going on? We need Denmark. And oh, by the way, we need to annex Canada and Mexico. Hey, we need you too. It'd be great if all of us can form into just one supercontinent.
And the guy hasn't even taken office yet.
Right. He's not even in office. Right.
Yeah, no, I think we are entering into a new era of gangster politics. It reminds me of the early 1930s. Yeah, I mean, Hitler took over the Sudetenland, the German-speaking portion of Czechoslovakia, to defend freedom, as he put it. And Trump is doing this as well. Now he's picking on. I mean, that's a classic bully behavior. He's not threatening to invade China, but he's threatening to invade, Denmark and Greenland and Panama. It's extraordinary. And NATO. I mean, what does NATO even mean in this context?
I have no idea.
We are really entering into a storm here, a real storm. So, batten down the hatches.
Well, dig into that for me. What do you mean, a storm? I've pointed out that the world seems strange right now. You get South Korea, where the guy tries to declare martial law and literally take over. I mean, literally trying to provoke a war with North Korea, even to the point of disappearing his political enemies in the country to blame the North Koreans. I mean, just outlandish stuff that was being uncovered in South Korea. You get what's taking place in Syria, where you just get this complete collapse of that government. You get the complete collapse of that government. Then you get the situation in Lebanon, where Israel goes on a killing spree in Lebanon, Gaza, West Bank, with the world just kind of standing there and watch. You get Georgia, where they tried to literally overthrow that government. You get Romania, where they kill that election because of TikTok videos that ended up coming out of the Liberal Party. It wasn't even coming from the Russians. And you get the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014 with the subsequent invasion by Russia. Like, this world, it's like this facade of international law seems to be waning, in a very strange way that hasn't necessarily been, I guess, acknowledged yet. But give me your take on that. How do you view this?
And to be fair, you also have Hamas killing 350 people at a rock concert in the name of freedom and brotherhood.
1,200, yeah.
But 350 young people at a rock concert mowed down by guns. I think that what we're seeing is a dramatic lurch to the right, and the eruption of all kinds of intra-right battles, where these various forces go at one another, and each one is so right-wing that you don't know you don't know
who to root for.
Precisely right. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. And I think that the entire world system is lurching to the right, and I think it's very significant. So I think it's part of the storm that we're seeing, and I think that Trump is going to just blow things up. I really do. I think that the opening shots at Mexico, Panama, Canada, and Denmark are extraordinary, completely unprecedented in the post-war period. Really brings us back to the dark days of the 1930s. I think that we don't know what's in store in terms of immigrants here in the U.S., but I think there's every reason to fear the worst. And I think we'll see a huge number of attacks on social welfare, environmental protection. I mean, the global climate crisis is real. We see this in Los Angeles. This is not. No one's making those fires up. This is not. These are not images that are being manufactured. This is real, all too real. A major city going up in flames, and that is because Southern California is in the midst of a 7 or 8 month drought that has turned their woodlands into tinderboxes, and they have now exploded in flame, and the forces are really converging in a very dramatic and powerful way.
The irony of it is that There was a document that the U.S. government made under the Trump administration dealing with climate change. And, for all the talk about it's a hoax and everything else, in the climate document, they pointed, I think they estimated out to like 50 years or something, and said the temperature will be up by 10 degrees, but we can't do anything about it anyway. So, we shouldn't, we should just try to exploit the resources, which goes back to the whole Greenland thing of, hey, we can now extract those resources from that territory or from, the Arctic or from wherever else, now that these things have melted as a result of the temperature increasing. It's astonishing. One point though, you said you believe that we're in a bubble like in 2008, that this is going to somehow fall apart. Now, to be fair, we're what, 36 trillion in debt. I think we're putting on 2 trillion per year at this point. And Musk, who was supposed to cut 2 trillion from the deficit, it's like good luck with that, has come out saying, yeah, I don't think I'll be able to do that for obvious reasons. If it's 2 trillion, it's there for a reason, meaning, they're not just making that up. There may be pork in the budget, but much of those resources are there because somebody put them there for some kind of reason. Why do you believe that we're at the cusp of somewhat of a breakdown? Is it just because we can't keep going in this way where we're putting trillions of dollars on the deficit without really doing anything to do anything about it? I mean, we're fundamentally holding an empire across the globe, and we're paying for it with funny money. But what's your thoughts?
Well, in 2008, in the years leading up to 2008, from roughly 2004 on, the Fed kept interest rates very, very low. Alan Greenspan kept interest rates very low. Alan Greenspan was seen as the second coming of Jesus. I mean, literally, there was some congressional hearing where a member of Congress, just thanked him profusely for running the economy so well. He kept interest rates low, and you saw this fantastic wave of speculation that was, broadly speaking, based on real estate, based on mortgages, and it kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and everyone was kind of happy because a lot of people were making, a lot of money off of it. And it was thrilling, it was wonderful until it wasn't, until the whole structure crashed, starting in 2007. And now we're seeing things like, with Bitcoin, the Trump administration basically is Bitcoin Inc. His two leading economic members of his cabinet, Lutnick in the Department of Commerce and Besant in the Treasury, are both Bitcoin fans. His two sons, he and his two sons, have formed a Bitcoin venture with Witkoff, who was his general Middle East emissary, another member of his administration. They're talking about the U.S. Treasury investing in Bitcoin, which will presumably drive the price higher and higher. So I think we're seeing almost a leveraged buyout, a Bitcoin takeover of the federal government, where federal economic power is being used to pump this bubble higher and higher. Meanwhile, real estate is out of control. The real estate market is frozen. I know, many young people in New York City who are just simply unable to find a place to live because the rents have just zoomed to levels far beyond, anything they can remotely afford. Real estate is zooming. Crypto is zooming. The stock market is zooming. And the economy in general, the country in general, is doing lousy, as, for example, Los Angeles shows, and the teetering insurance industry in California. So there's a widening gap between reality and Wall Street fantasy. And I just think that as a sign of deepening instability. And I think that we're going to see a blowout that will make that'll make 2008 seem like a warm up.
I want you to. Oh, please. I'm sorry. I thought you
Yeah,
were.
it will likely take place while Trump is in office. So therefore, the political implications will be very powerful.
Add to that technology, and the reason I'm saying add to that technology, in the next 10 years, AI is probably going to get rid of thousands of jobs across the United States. And that's including especially driving jobs. The moment that you get automated cars, an Uber doesn't require a driver, a Lyft doesn't require a driver, trucks don't require drivers. Those people are going to have to find something else to do. Even things like YouTube. I mean, some of the AIs today are astonishing. Like the similarities with human beings, you can imagine that's only going to get more and more sophisticated over the course of time, where those things get trained to do various jobs. And like any good capitalist, if I can put a computer in or a robot in for a nickel less, I'm going to put that robot in for a nickel less. It allows me to maximize my profit. That nickel less for that one person ends up being millions of dollars over the context of an entire corporation. And, I know for myself, when I was doing software engineer, there were applications and projects that we did that literally eliminated the need for various people. I remember there was one application I did that got rid of the need for 3 people because it was just more efficient at doing that particular task, where you only needed one person to kind of look at it. We can see it in checkout counters, where you go to the store today. That's probably the thing that's in our face the most, where you do your own groceries. And you might have 1 or 2 lanes that are open. You have one person that's handling 5 different lanes because people are checking themselves out. Okay, well, those are jobs in the next iteration of that business that you're not hiring for anymore. And you extrapolate that through the entirety of the country, or for that matter, the world. You can imagine a large sum of jobs are just going to be eliminated without any political means to deal with the fact that those jobs are eliminated. That has to be factored into that. How do you see society adjusting in any way elegantly to deal with that new reality that's coming about? The reason why I bring this up, my ex wanted to do a YouTube channel, but she didn't want her face on the channel. And I found this kind of AI that you can write it and it would say it. It would give you human mannerisms. It would match a person's movements. So let's say if you did a video, but you didn't want yourself to be in the video, you can make a cartoon figure and you can map it to your own movements to give it these kind of human-esque movements with a certain voice, with inflection and everything else. It looks fundamentally like a person because it's mimicking a person. And she saw that and it was like, okay, why am I doing this? Meaning it's so dispiriting to look at that and think to yourself, okay, this is intruding into human affairs. But that is going to be a reality that we're all going to have to deal with on some level. What is your take on that? Do you see society in any way accommodating that? And the reason you're a perfect person to ask for this, you're a critic of the U.S. policy, and this is a political issue, less a business issue.
Yeah, over the history of capitalism, which at this point is roughly 250 years, there have been dramatic changes in technology. Dramatic, obviously. Steam power, electrical power, nuclear power, etc. But they have actually created more jobs rather than doing away with jobs. I mean, the industrial proletariat has gone from a few thousand people in northern England to now billions of people around the globe. So technology doesn't eliminate jobs. Technology actually creates jobs by expanding labor power. Now, nonetheless, the road gets very complicated. There are lots of twists and turns. Productivity has been lagging in recent decades. It's not at all clear what impact AI will have on that. AI is very promising, but so far no one really knows what AI is going to do. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone agrees that it's amazing, but no one really knows what it's going to do. So it's a faith-based judgment at this point. So I don't know what impact AI will have 10 years from now. I presume it'll have a big impact, but precisely what that will be, I really don't know. And I don't think anyone else does either. In fact, a very good economics blogger named Michael Roberts had recently attended a major economics conference in which AI was a big topic of discussion. And the audience was evenly divided between those who say it'll accomplish miracles, those who say it'll do nothing, and those who are shaking their head in puzzlement in between. So no one knows. So we'll see what happens. But I do really think the economy, the capitalist economy, we've been in a decades-long slowdown. The economy since 2008 has weakened visibly. The U.S. is doing relatively well, but accent on the word relatively, because it's by its own standards, its performance has weakened. It looks better compared to Europe, but only because they have weakened more. And as the economy weakens, the political structures that are erected on the basis of that economy are weakening too. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing guys like Schultz, who in better times would have been perfectly adequate as a chancellor. Now they look really weak and and foolish. The same thing goes with Macron, with Starmer, with Joe Biden, who was in his final days here and looks like an idiot. It reminds me, by the way. I wrote an article a couple of years ago, and everyone told me I was exaggerating ridiculously. I compared Joe Biden to Konstantin Chernenko. Konstantin Chernenko was a Soviet leader who was elected in 1982. He was so sickly and weak when he was elected that he could barely even climb up the podium. And he lasted in office like 15 months. He was in the hospital the entire time. And finally died. And he personified perfectly the Soviet system in the mid 80s as it was just running out of steam. But what does Joe Biden represent?
Yeah,
I mean, this guy is this is the same thing. This guy is barely coherent. A federal prosecutor about a year ago ruled that this guy, you couldn't even put him on a witness stand because he was simply incapable of testifying, in a coherent manner. And so doesn't he personify the rot at the heart of the U.S. system? I mean, if Chernenko did, with regard to the Soviet system, then I think much the same can be said with regard to the U.S. system. In fact, take further, I think that what we're seeing around the globe is a crash of neoliberalism that reminds me of the crash of Soviet communism in 1989 to 91. So we're seeing that the neoliberal center is collapsing and all kinds of right-wing forces are rising up and preparing to take over. Now, there's going to be absolute chaos as a result, but that's what seems to be happening.
That is a great summary of it. I think that's a great summary of it, a crash of neoliberalism. And I guess the question becomes what comes after? And like you said, chaos as we come into some kind of new world order. Daniel, man, thank you for this great rundown. I really appreciate this. Yeah, awesome rundown. I don't have anything else to say about it. I really appreciate it. Always appreciate your commentary. I really do. Daniel Lazar, he is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at DH.Lazar, and you can find his column on weeklyworker.co.uk and strategicculture.org and many others. Man, thank you for this, Daniel. I hope you're having a good year so far. I appreciate you joining me.
So far.
Yeah, cool.
Right. Thank you very much.
So far. Let's hope it keeps going. Have a good one, man. All right. I appreciate Daniel for joining me. Great rundown. I mean, we basically went across the world. There's some people who are generalists, and people who are generalists, you could basically talk to about pretty much anything. I brought him on because I wanted to have a conversation about Europe and what was taking place in Europe, because that stuff was just fantastic. But I can hear my next guest here, and I am deeply and greatly looking forward to this. Dimitri Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Canada. In 2020, Dimitri ran for leadership of the Green Party of Canada. You are the man I want to talk to. How you doing, Dimitri? You doing okay this morning?
I'm fine, Jamal. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Better that you are with me. Is it okay to say where you are? I mean, I don't want to.
Is it where?
Is it okay to say where you are? Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's fine.
Okay. How is it in Cuba? Are you in Havana? Which part of Cuba are you in?
I'm actually on the southern coast, just outside the city of Trinidad, which is, I think, about 75,000 people. It's very old. I think it's the third oldest city in Cuba, and it's beautiful here, and the people are, I've always been fond of the Cuban people, but they're clearly going through a very difficult period.
Yeah, the U.S. and those sanctions. Can you give us, before we get into any other part, just the effect that those sanctions have had on Cuba?
Well, the current principal problem with the sanctions, there are many, is that it's causing havoc with the electricity system. So the Cubans are having great difficulty obtaining parts that are needed to maintain their electricity infrastructure, fuel. And so there are consistent blackouts. Sometimes they can go on for many hours.
Wow.
But quite apart from that, of course, just normal food staples are difficult to access. Medicines are difficult to access. These are really crushing sanctions that I don't think really any aspect of their economy is spared by them. So it's impossible, really, whatever economic model the Cuban people choose, it's impossible for the economy to realize its potential in such circumstances. There's a debate going on here about how much of this is due to these sanctions and how much of this is due to flaws in the government and its practices and policies. And that's a debate that should be had. But no rational person would deny that these sanctions are having an enormously negative impact on the Cuban economy.
And the sanctions themselves, they're coming from America, but they're not capable of trading with other countries. It's like, are the sanctions going beyond America? They're going to other countries in addition to America. Forgive me, I don't know. I know we've passed sanctions on Cuba. And I know when I'm in other countries, I can get Cuban products in a way that I can't necessarily get in America. So I just kind of assume that they were able to trade with other countries. How does it work in practice?
Well, as I understand it, the sanctions don't apply to third countries that choose to trade with Cuba. So, for example, Canada, where I come from, does have limited trade with Cuba. Canadians come here, quite a few actually, during the wintertime as tourists. So my understanding of the American sanctions is they're not secondary, which means that they apply to third countries and nationals of third countries that trade with Cuba.
Yeah.
But the fact that Cuba is, so close to the United States, it's a small island nation. The mere fact that the United States itself, which so dominates the economy of the Western Hemisphere, imposes these sanctions, has a dramatically negative impact on the country. And interestingly, there was a resolution, every year there's a resolution of the United Nations General Assembly about these sanctions. And this year, only two countries, there was a resolution of the UN General Assembly condemning the sanctions and calling for the United States to end them. And only two countries voted against the resolution. The United States, correct.
Yeah.
US and Israel. The eternal naysayers, there they were, and that's a measure of how unified the international community is in opposing what is really a form of economic warfare against an impoverished people.
It's outrageous.
It's
so spiteful.
If the American government actually cared about the Cuban people, it would not destroy their economy. I think any rational person would understand that.
Yeah, agreed. So let's talk about Trudeau. Trudeau is out. And I want to get to some of the reasons that Trudeau is out. I want to play this clip. This is Trudeau giving his farewell speech. I find this to be comical. I'm not sure why. I want to get your take on it, but this is his outing.
Over the holidays, I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the president of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
How did he get so hated? I mean, he went in with a massive amount of popularity, and he is leaving just with complete recrimination at this point. Well, what happened? How did he fail so miserably?
Well, let's go back to the beginning. First of all, he's been around for 10 years, and in and of himself, that's a problem. But he came to power in 2015. I actually ran in that election for the Green Party.
That's right.
And one of the promises that he made right out of the gate, which he broke within a matter of months, it was a very, very important promise, was to deliver electoral reform. In this country, we have or in Canada, not where I am now, but in Canada, we have something called the first past the post system, which we inherited from Britain. And basically the way that works is, whoever finishes first in any particular riding, which is our equivalent of a congressional district, gets the seat. And, it's the number of seats or votes that the other candidates obtain, the losing candidates obtain, is an irrelevancy. They're basically wasted. So Canadians wanted, a majority of them, a system called proportional representation, which meant that the seats in Parliament would be allocated in proportion to the popular vote, roughly. Okay, and there are other Western countries that have this system. A number of them, actually. In Europe, I believe Australia has a proportional representation system, possibly New Zealand as well, so that it's the composition of Parliament reflects the popular will to a far greater degree than it does now. So now you can have a party in Canada's Parliament that gets 38% of the popular vote, and they get a majority of the seats, which is crazy. You can have even a large majority with less than 40% of the popular vote. So he, within a matter of a year, just broke that promise. It was really an important promise that brought him to power in 2015. Another thing is he came to power partly, sure, yes, he was telegenic and young, and he was full of optimism, and that certainly endeared him to a lot of Canadians. But he won that election handily because he was preceded by another prime minister who had been in office for a long time, Stephen Harper, and Canadians were sick of the man. He was a conservative, very much a neoliberal, neocon. So he benefited from that. And over time, people came to realize that Justin Trudeau is not only dishonest, because I just mentioned one promise he broke. There were numerous others, but also he was an empty suit. This is not a man who's very thoughtful. Sorry, it looks like the electricity just went out here. So I've gone back.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm sorry for the Cuban people. He over time, people came to understand who Justin Trudeau is, and Justin Trudeau really is, I would call him a neoliberal wolf in sheep's clothing. He's not, on social issues, he's progressive, but on economic issues, he continued to pursue policies that were very much like the conservative policies that favored the wealthy, that exacerbated inequality. He kept capitulating to demands, from the U.S. government and the right wing in this country to increase military spending. A report just came out tomorrow, which showed that in Ontario, the number of homeless people. This is might not seem big by U.S. standards, but it's a big number for Canada.
Yeah.
In 2024 was over 85,000 people. Okay, and before it was much smaller, and it had gone up like 25% in 2 years.
Really? Wow.
So if you look nationally, that's just Ontario. If you look nationally, the number could be well into the hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless. And I grew up in this country, and I walk around the major cities, and I see homeless people everywhere. Far more homeless people than I saw when I was a young man.
I thought Canada had a heavy social I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought they had a social safety net similar to Europe, like similar to like a Germany or a Denmark or Austria.
Yeah, I would say that we're kind of in between the German model or the Scandinavian model and the United States.
I see.
So
Okay.
it's kind of not quite as robust as the European model. And the European model is weakening as well. It's been degraded considerably.
Mhm.
When I'm in European cities, I see far more homeless people than I used to see. So all of these things accumulated, and there was just Trudeau fatigue as well. People just got tired of him. The sad news for Canadians is that the person who's poised to replace him is probably going to be considerably worse. This character,
Wow.
Pierre Poilievre, who's the Conservative Party leader. I fear for the future of the country, frankly.
Wow. So when is the next election supposed to take place?
Well, we don't have a date yet because the government hasn't fallen.
Okay.
The government has.
They just replaced him within the context of his own party.
Yeah, within his own party, I believe he plans to leave sometime within the next 2 to 3 months. The press reports are that the contest to replace him will be quite shortened. Normally, it's 3 to 6 months in the Liberal Party to select a new leader. They're probably looking at less than 2 months here. Sorry, 1 second.
God, please, you can continue. I think he has frozen, and they may be having difficulties with the electricity and everything in Cuba. He mentioned before that they were having difficulties with electricity. He may be having trouble with the signal also, especially if the lights went off. So I will watch him, and hopefully he can come back. I don't typically like to leave the frozen face because, he's about to collapse. All right. So one of the I don't think he's there with the lights out. They might have lost signal also. I've always wanted to go to Cuba. I've never had the opportunity to visit. But hopefully Daniel can come back. He is out. Okay, he's gone. So one of the funny things about Trudeau that I was going to get Daniel to hit on was this conversation that Donald Trump had. Because, Donald Trump doesn't just go after a political opponent. He humiliates political opponents. Like, it's not just, we're having a go at one another. It's my job is to make you look bad. So when it rains, it pours. Trump in an interview was talking about Trudeau, and he said this, which is comedic gold, but it is utterly brutal.
So I spoke with Justin Trudeau. In fact, he flew to Mar-a-Lago within about 15 seconds after the call. And he was at Mar-a-Lago. We were having dinner talking about it. I said, you have to close up your borders because they're coming in the northern border too a lot. Not like the southern border, but they're coming in the Canadian border a lot. And drugs are pouring in. Almost as importantly, drugs are pouring in, maybe more importantly, drugs are pouring in at levels never seen before, 10 times what we had. They're just pouring in. We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country at about 25%. So I spoke with Justin Trudeau. In fact,
he said he came in tears. He was in tears. He wept. He cried when he got here, and I told him what I was going to do to him. That is outrageous. Oh, you're back. welcome back. I didn't think you were coming back. Thank you for coming back.
Sorry,
Um,
the electricity issue is
No, you're perfectly fine. I totally understood. I was showing the audience, and I'll show you this clip to get your take on this clip, because you pointed out that he kept catering to the U.S., like he kept folding and folding to the U.S. interests. Donald Trump said this about Trudeau, and I want to get your take on this. For one, it's funny because he said Trudeau came there in tears, but I want to get your take.
I spoke with Justin Trudeau. In fact, he flew to Mar-a-Lago within about 15 seconds after the call. And he was at Mar-a-Lago. We were having dinner talking about it. I said, you have to close up your borders because they're coming in the northern border too a lot. Not like the southern border, but they're coming in the Canadian border a lot. And drugs are pouring in. Almost as importantly, drugs are pouring in. Maybe more importantly, drugs are pouring in at levels never seen before, 10 times what we had. They're just pouring in. We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country at about 25%. That's a
I mean, he is effectively bullying Canada in this way. For one, I don't believe Justin Trudeau was there in tears. But yeah, Justin Trudeau did show up in Mar-a-Lago pretty quickly when Donald Trump started throwing around those threats of tariffs. Yeah. How do you see this? What is your take on this? Because whether it's Trudeau or another president, if Trump is going to take this kind of hardball stance, I mean, for one, do you believe he's going to take this hardball stance? Two, are drugs and all of these other nefarious items pouring through the Canadian border in the way that Donald Trump is saying? Give me your thoughts. Give me your take on this?
Okay, so first of all, let's get real here. As long as there is high demand for drugs in the United States, the drugs are going to find a way into the country. That's the end of the story. So if you want to deal, you got to deal with the core causes of drug abuse and consumption and so forth. And one of the ways to deal with this issue is legalization. So to Trudeau's credit, in my opinion, he did legalize cannabis, pot. That was a sensible thing for him to do. Now there's quality control, and it's raising considerable tax revenue for the government, which the government needs. Whereas it's illegal, there's no quality control. It's going to get into the market anyways. It's going to be more expensive, and the government gets no tax revenue from it. Mm-hmm. So Trump's basic, view about how to stop drug abuse in the United States is fundamentally flawed. In any event, it is true that Trudeau did rush off. In fact, I commented on it at the time. I referred to him on social media as behaving like a vassal. What he should have done was he should have stood up and said, that would be a violation of the trade agreement, Mr. Trump. I mean, you would be violating the trade agreement, and Canada will exercise its legal options under the trade agreement. We'll go. By
the way, the trade agreement that he made. I mean, if you remember, the trade agreement that he signed himself.
Yeah. So, but now that's not to say that Donald Trump wouldn't do it anyways. He's capable of saying, well, to hell with the trade agreement, and we're just going to ignore any rulings by the NAFTA tribunal. And the problem here, Jamal, and I've been talking about this for years, is that successive governments in Canada have made us increasingly economically dependent upon the United States. It's now by far the largest trading partner. And I mean, it counts for a huge proportion of our international trade. And if the United States decided to impose 25% across the board tariffs, this would have a very severe impact on the Canadian economy. And what the answer to that is that Canada should diversify its trading relationships. It should, for example, trade more with countries like China, trade more with the EU, trade more with Russia. But no, we've followed slavishly the desire of the successive American governments for us to, concentrate our trade with the United States, and this leaves us vulnerable. And so this is a problem now that any Canadian leader is going to have to deal with, notwithstanding the protections under the trade agreement with the United States. But so this is really a hole that Justin Trudeau and other Canadian prime ministers have dug for Canada, and it ain't going to be easy to get out of it.
Well, speaking of that, annexation is the other thing that Donald Trump was talking about, where effectively saying he wants to annex Canada and use quote unquote economic force in order to do so. For one, where do you think all of this is coming from? I mean, my take on this, and I want to get yours, is that Trump is looking out at the world and he sees larger threats than what the United States was dealing with prior. Now, these threats are created. I don't believe for a moment that Russia, China, all of these countries are necessarily antagonistic to America. We kind of make them that way through our policy. But nevertheless, this is the way he's a neocon. This is the way he looks out at the world. And he says, I want to make Fortress America. And I think he's looking at this kind of supercontinent idea of Mexico, Canada, and the United States being this kind of one thing led under this kind of American hegemony of the region. I mean, give me your take on this. For one, do you think that's right? Do you think something else is going on here in the way that he's thinking about this? And all of this thought and talk about economic force against Canada. Give me your thoughts on this.
Look, who knows what's going on in the brain of Donald Trump, right? We're all trying to read his mind. That's a challenge. But I'll give you my best sense of what's going on tomorrow. I think that Donald Trump understands fundamentally that the United States can no longer project its power internationally, globally, anywhere near to the same extent that it did previously. And I think this is one of the reasons why he's talked a lot, and let's hope he's serious about bringing the Ukraine war to an end. Right. Recently you may have seen that he even shared a video of Jeffrey Sachs.
Yes.
Right. That was wild. I couldn't believe he did that. So he's apparently alienated Netanyahu so much that Netanyahu isn't going to come to his inauguration. That's what I understand. So that's a sign that he also understands that things in West Asia have gotten out of control and that this is not serving the interests of the United States. So he doesn't want to be the guy, I think, who is seen to be pulling back the United States and ending the era of U.S. global hegemony. So he's trying to compensate for the loss that ultimately he's going to have to recognize the United States has suffered in Ukraine and to a degree also in West Asia by expanding the scope of American power and sovereignty in the Western Hemisphere. This is his way of, preserving the image of America. And it's not just a question of imagery. It actually would considerably strengthen the United States if the government in Washington had complete control. Right now, it has partial control over the resources of Canada. Principally, and here we're talking about oil, a lot of mineral wealth and fresh water, which the United States is going to need increasingly. So if the United States had direct control over these resources rather than indirect control through its vassal in Ottawa, that would strengthen the United States. Same thing if the United States had direct control over the Panama Canal, if it absorbed Greenland, which has potentially vast wealth, natural resource wealth as well. And so it's both I think from Trump's perspective, a pragmatic way to enhance American power, but also a way to compensate from the loss of prestige when he signs that deal with Russia that effectively acknowledges that the United States has been defeated there, and ultimately may end up doing a similar deal in West Asia. So I think this is a way to compensate.
And, just so people would know what we're talking about with the Jeffrey Sachs thing, when this first came out, I didn't even believe it was real. Like, I was like, there's no way Trump put this up. But as, you can see right here, it's under Donald Trump, Truth Social. And I'm going to play a part of the clip because I want to get, what do you think is in his mind on this? I mean, for the most part, Trump has been completely obsequious to Israel. I mean, you can look at the people that he put in his cabinet. All of these people are just, I would call them sociopaths in a way that they act and the things that they have said, and this kind of strict obedience to this notion of genocide. If you want to shoot kids, fair enough. If you want to have kids freeze and babies freeze in the cold, fair enough. Israel has the right to defend itself, even as it valiantly, murders a baby. And so this is Jeffrey Sachs, given his astonishingly good commentary that Jeffrey Sachs typically gives. It's not the commentary. It's the fact that Donald Trump put this out on his own post.
The war in Syria. And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Shulsky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from?
You know, he gets to a certain point where he gets to Netanyahu and he says he's a sick son of a bitch. In that clip, in that exact same clip, when he gets to the end of that clip, he says Netanyahu pushed us into the war in Iraq, and he's a sick son of a bitch. So, yeah, Netanyahu apparently was supposed to show up at the inauguration, canceled. I don't know if they're directly related, but it could be, considering these things happen kind of back to back. What the hell? Like, I honestly have no context to put that in. I mean, there was a clip going back, I believe Dialogue, what is it called? Dialogue something. His channel showed Dialogue Works, right? He played the clip of Donald Trump. This was years ago, where Donald Trump had apparently had a meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, and had a meeting with Netanyahu. He sat there with Abbas and thought, this man is grandfatherly. I like this guy. He seems to really want to end the conflict. He talked to the guy for hours. He goes to Netanyahu and hates him. And says Netanyahu doesn't want to end the conflict. Netanyahu effectively wants to keep this war going and steal it all. And it was like, honest. You know, like it was an honest take, right? Anybody who's looking at this who's not necessarily having these kind of political biases is like, well, he obviously doesn't want to end the conflict. He wants to use this conflict as a way of expanding territory. And considering that the Netanyahu government was effectively working with Hamas, well, that kind of gets across the political machinations that was going into maintaining power and extending control. These days, you would never hear that come out of Trump's mouth. And then all of a sudden, this clip, we got about 2 minutes left. What do you think is going on here? What context can you place this in?
It could be a little bit personal because, you know, as has been noted by others, Netanyahu was so quick to congratulate Joe Biden when he won, when he defeated Trump, and despite Trump's claims that the election was rigged, and he, you know, commented on time. I think he, you know, said "fuck him." That's how he felt about it. You know, but is that the main driver of his current attitude towards Netanyahu? I don't think so. I think Trump probably grasps that war, especially on the scale we're seeing in West Asia, is bad for business. It's very bad for business. It's not advancing the interests of the United States. Israel has been pummeling the bejesus out of Gaza for now 15 months. This week, they sustained quite significant casualties in northern Gaza, despite all the damage they've inflicted. There are reports that Hamas has recruited, because the population is so enraged against Israel, in excess of 10,000 new fighters.
Yeah,
they may even have more fighters now than they did before. So I think Trump is looking at this. He's looking at what's going on in Syria. He's listening to the Saudis, who are probably getting very, very concerned. He's seen the Red Sea shipping as being adversely affected by the efforts of Ansar Allah. This is not just affecting Israel. This is affecting the cost of shipping for other countries, particularly in Europe. And he's saying, this is just nuts. We got to bring this to an end. And Trump, when he wants to bring conflict to an end, he's kind of like a schoolmaster, and he, you know, uses the carrot and the stick with both sides of the conflict. And so one of the things he's been saying is, if the hostages aren't returned, you know, by the time I take office, the hostages Hamas has, all hell is going to break loose. You know, so he's trying to place pressure on Hamas, but he realizes that if he only places pressure on one side, he's probably not going to get a deal that's sustainable. So he's trying to pressure both sides into making concessions, and he's using the same strategy with Russia, right? You know, Kellogg, so others in his administration were going out and saying, if Russia doesn't sit down at the table and negotiate, we're going to, you know, flood Ukraine with more weaponry. So he's using the carrot and the stick approach there as well to try to give both parties talk to each other. I think that's what's most likely going on. And if that is what's going on, I don't know that his approach is necessarily going to be effective, but it's a good thing that the man is trying to bring that horror show to an end. Hopefully that's what he's trying to achieve.
Well, he did tell, the Muslim community that I'm going to end this war. Now, none of us believed him per se, because, over the context of the election, he was so, anything Israel did is great. Joe Biden is being too weak. All of this, rhetoric. But when he went to the Muslim community, he said, I'm going to end the war. I'm going to end the war. I'm going to end the war. He kept telling them, I'm going to end the war. He said, I'm going to end wars, not start them. And then the thing is, the people that he was putting in his administration, though, were just, cretins in regards to these kind of hawks. And so there's this question of whether or not Donald Trump is going to be able to control the animals that he got in his administration. By the same token, he also put people like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. Yeah, it's just fascinating. We will see what that administration is like. He's not even in office yet. And Joe Biden is effectively receded into the background. So, but Dimitri, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I've wanted you on for a while. And we have audience members saying this warrior needs to be here for longer. Let this warrior stay longer. You have a fan base here. So thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate it. Be safe on your travels, by the way.
Thank you, Jamal. I always enjoy our conversations. Take care.
Thanks, man. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, he ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada against the failure that is leaving Justin Trudeau. Have a good one, my man. Be safe. All right. And I want to bring in the man of the hour, my former co-host, political analyst, Malik Abdul. What's happening, my man? Uh-oh. My man is frozen again. Come on. You can do it. There you go. How you doing, man?
It has to be StreamYard, because this never happens. I don't know what's going on. It never happens with Skype, Zoom, or anything else. I don't understand what's going on.
To be fair, some systems have like for example, some of this software. I remember I was building this application called Connected Rewards, and it was when you go into shopping malls today, you have these little things that people can use. So we were building that before they were building that. The guy who I was working with, Don, had the idea like years before they had got those things in stores. And I was building the application out for him. And, he was one of these people who had all of these ideas. And the moment that he has a software engineer, he wants to do all of these ideas at once, which means he doesn't get nothing done. It's like, oh, change this, update this, tweak this, let's do this. But effectively, though, I had to rebuild that application because it was sending too much data and it was slowing down the application. So it's possible that StreamYard may be sending more data than some of the other applications in the way that the applications use. I had to convert it while I was using almost like, it wasn't buffering, but it was kind of like buffering. It was using small amounts of data in chunks that could be expanded once the data was sent over to the server side in order to speed up this software stuff. I'm sorry.
Well, hey, we're here for now. It's not buffering right now, so we're good.
Yeah. What's up? Fair enough. How you doing, man? You doing all right?
I'm good.
I am glad you're doing good. You look good. Everything is great. Let's talk politics. So Donald Trump, who is not even president yet, has been making a huge amount of waves. That is to put it mildly. And one of the interesting things that has come out is apparently they just had a meeting recently where they're talking about strategy to get policy accomplished. Basically, we're going to get something done. And, before I get to that, did you see at the funeral Obama sitting beside a Nazi? And when he was sitting beside that Nazi, how Obama was talking to that Nazi and laughing with that Nazi and that Nazi who was about to take over America and destroy American democracy, that all of these guys were just having a great time with that Nazi. This is the Jimmy Carter funeral. Look at what's happening here. They said this man was going to end America.
And most of them were in the same room. Was in 2018 at the funeral of George H.W. Bush.
They seem to be having a great conversation.
In office then.
Look at that, Obama.
Person missing.
He's laughing it up. Bush doesn't look happy.
And most of them were in the same room was in 2018
But
at the funeral of
Obama
George
and
H.W.
Trump
Bush,
looks like
president.
they are having a good old time. And you know what's funny too? Kamala Harris and her husband did not look happy. They did not look happy. They looked like they were pissed. Also, apparently Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't get along all that well. So they didn't get along. And I think Malik is frozen once again.
Here we go.
Yeah, StreamYard. Yeah, StreamYard. Yeah, they didn't look happy. I mean, like Obama and Trump seemed to be the two that was the most happiest at the funeral, weirdly enough. My take on that was fuck those guys. Because, you know, when Jimmy Carter was alive, they didn't want to have anything to do with Jimmy Carter. If you notice, Carter wasn't at Obama's inauguration, or if that not even nomination. He wasn't anywhere near Bill Clinton. They kept him away as if he was radioactive. And now that he's died, all of a sudden, all of them show up to his funeral and Joe Biden gives a eulogy. He wasn't even at Joe Biden's inauguration. They want nothing to do with Jimmy Carter. My point of view is fuck those guys. I'm sorry. I know that sounds brutal, but it's like, for political reasons, you kept that man at arm's length the entire time. And now at his funeral, you're going to get out there and basically show up as if, you know, you were there his entire life. It's like, who you playing that role for? But I'm sorry.
Yep.
Give me your take on these guys hanging out with this Hitler type character that they've defined as Hitler that's going to end American democracy in 2 weeks.
So I think the important thing here is that people should see this as an example of what politicians do all the time. They may make a front. They may front on, you know, national television, but behind closed doors. And we've heard this many times where, you know, it's like, well, they're friends behind closed doors. A lot of this stuff that you see is for us. It is for us to respond to, get mad that someone said this or that. But at the end of the day, you're going to dinner together. Even though they didn't have a contentious relationship, remember, what was that? Justice Ginsburg and who was that? The one who died. I can't even remember. Scalia. They had a very close relationship despite being at ideological opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that was a genuine relationship. Now, Donald Trump and Donald Trump and you know, Barack Obama aren't friends, but obviously they believed in being friendly. And in fact, I think what you saw from Donald Trump is what you would see with Donald Trump with anyone who receives him in a respectful way. You've heard him say before, well, they were nice to me. Donald Trump is not naturally just a nasty person. A lot of times he's responding to the energy. And you saw Kamala Harris there. She just looked upset. Now, I will give her a pass. A lot of people have been making a big deal about her, you know, not speaking when she came out. I'm pretty sure that all of them had a conversation before they came out to the funeral, because for those VIPs, they were in a holding room. So they may have had conversations there. I don't think that she needed to necessarily be yapping it up, because we saw Barack Obama and Donald Trump doing that themselves. So you didn't need everybody there yapping it up. But I think that was a moment, and you're right, Carter didn't attend Donald Trump's inauguration, and it was clear that he didn't support him. And even George Bush, you know, I'm sure that he had a conversation with Donald Trump behind, you know, in the ante room or wherever they were. But I thought that at least for Barack Obama specifically, especially with the campaign that Barack Obama ran against Donald Trump, attacking him, as you said, as Hitler, attacking his supporters as Nazis, I thought that was a good moment. Barack Obama did what obviously Michelle Obama wasn't able to do. Now, people can say, well, she was on vacation. That's not surgery. That's a vacation, which means you have all of the resources in the world at your disposal, being a former first lady of the United States. Your husband is still under Secret Service protection. Obviously, Michelle Obama, at the drop of a dime, could have changed her plans, hopped on a plane, and came to the funeral. So I am absolutely fine with Michelle Obama. She's still mad, much like Kamala. I'm fine with her not being there, and I hope that she doesn't go to the inauguration. So we won't be talking about.
Wait, mad at what?
Because so you remember, like Michelle Obama's, even when Donald Trump was in office, but definitely after 2020, she's been very, very I don't want to use the word angry, but she's been something over the past couple of years where she seems to have taken these things personally in a way that most politicians typically don't. Like Barack Obama. Think about Donald Trump said
Virtualism.
Barack Obama wasn't even born in this
I know.
country.
I know.
Think about the number of
That's
things
crazy.
that not just Donald Trump said about Barack Obama, but Barack Obama said about Donald Trump. They were
Say that
seated
small
beside
penis.
literally, they were seated beside each other and they were able to get over themselves. And it wasn't just because they were presidents of the United States. It's a personality thing. And I think that for Michelle Obama and probably Kamala Harris and many other, remember, Oprah Winfrey said that if you vote for Donald Trump, there's a possibility that you may not be able to vote again. So I think that there are a lot of Black women specifically because they said it right after the election. We're going to sip tea and watch the country burn because they didn't vote for Kamala Harris. So I think that Michelle Obama she doesn't like Donald Trump. She probably doesn't like Melania Trump, and she doesn't want to be around them. And I think that is absolutely fine. Keep that negative energy at home. We didn't need to see it.
I guess my thing is, I feel so kind of weird about the fact that, and I didn't mean Bush wasn't at Carter's. I mean, that Carter wasn't at Bush's inauguration or Trump's inauguration. I mean, the Democrats. I mean, like Obama, Clinton kept Carter at arm's length. It wasn't.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
Like if you think of like when Al Gore was running his presidential bid, Carter wasn't there. When Bill Clinton, Carter wasn't there. When Obama, Carter wasn't there. Like meaning for all of these other Democratic presidents, you did bring out Bill Clinton for Obama. You didn't bring out Jimmy Carter. And so it's like now you're showing up at the man's funeral as if you guys have been together all along. Nonsense. This wasn't the case. Like, I feel like this is, too little too late. Don't show up at my funeral to give me flowers if you didn't care about me over the course of my lifetime. That's the way I looked at it. I was like, yeah, I get it, right? You're the president, so you're going to go to the president's funeral. It's a shocking thing when the president dies, even if the president's 150 years old, because we have so few of them. Fair enough. I don't know. I just...
But you know what? But that's actually a very good point, because I think what you're talking about is that they did not embrace Jimmy Carter as the former president of the United States in the same way that Democrats embraced Bill Clinton or Republicans embraced Ronald Reagan. They did not have that same sort of relationship with Carter, who after, and as everyone says, it's pretty much a consensus, who led a life post-presidency from his humanitarian efforts and all of that stuff. Like, he lived a great life post-presidency. His presidency itself was a problem, though.
Yeah, Margaret Kimberly was on the show. She wrote the book Prejudicial, and she kind of gave this synopsis of Jimmy Carter. I think everyone owns up to the fact that he was a good man, ultimately, especially after office. But in office, he had some difficulties, especially this transition of Democrats away from, I mean, you may not agree with it, but this transition away from this kind of New Deal politics of an FDR era into this kind of new Bill Clinton era of third way Democrats, that I would argue is part of the reason that they've lost the working class. I mean, one of the stats that came out the other day was just damning. And it pointed out for the first time since 1960s, Republican Party was able to take the working class vote. People who were making under $50,000 went to the Republican Party, as opposed to people who were making like over $100,000 going to Democrats. That's a flip in what typically happens, because under normal, iconography, under normal circumstances of things, the Republican Party is seen as a party of the rich. This time around, Trump was able to take that demographic. And I would, from my point of view, that is a Bill Clinton arc where the public started to realize, oh, Democrats are the party of the elites. And it made it worse through Obama, made it worse through Kamala Harris. And I'm realizing that Obama just had a political charisma about him that many of these other people just didn't have. Like, he had a political charisma that allowed him to carry the party in a way to win 2 elections that Biden, or for that matter, Harris, just didn't have. So I don't know. it's just wild to me. And I wanted to point that out because they call that man everything but a child of God. And then they're sitting there hamming it up with him.
Remember what, and I know we're going to go to the some of the other topics, but remember what happened almost immediately after the election. We got the news that Mika and Joe went down to Mar-a-Lago. Their show was ground zero for anti-Trump, and they said, well, they pretty much said we went down and kissed the ring.
Yep.
And I think that's all because they want to be able to have access to Donald Trump as president of the United States. And it would not surprise me if in that discussion, a conversation was had that they want to interview the president, Donald Trump, when he becomes president of the United States. It wasn't just because things are changing. There's a reason that they did that. But if you have Mika and Joe kissing the ring, then you know something is up.
I mean, and they were attacked for that. I mean, like people, Democrats flipped out. How dare you do that? How dare you go and talk to that man? I mean, you got all of these women, Whoopi Goldberg, saying men aren't getting any more coochie from her. And it's like, it's like, like who? Like Whoopi Goldberg out here like that, where she can shut her snapper, and guys are like, oh my God, Whoopi Goldberg is not giving it up no more. Yeah, man, they were freaking out. Black women felt some kind of way about their loss. But Trump is trying to enact his strategy or his policies, and so he goes to the Republican Party, and that they have a meeting, a conference. And there was this kind of disagreement on, okay, how do we get our agenda passed? Do we do it in one big bill, kind of using budget reconciliation? That's the thing that Democrats typically use when they try to get something with a 50-vote majority. Or do we break it up into two bills? Now, Trump is like, I could care less. I just want my agenda passed. Just get it done. What is this agenda that he is trying to get accomplished? Or do we even know at this point?
Well, it's ever evolving. Obviously, that there are things that Donald Trump is going to focus on day one around immigration, doing the things that he can through executive order, because Congress is a much different animal. He's going to do some things around executive orders when it comes to immigration, probably other things that he can do around education, maybe throw in some of this other stuff. A lot of the focus, and this is what he did back in 2017 when he got in office. It was his 100-day plan. All presidents have this 100-day plan because it's like a marker.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of cuts and regulations, a lot of proposals to end this. He's going to almost every single negative from his perspective executive order that Biden signed on day one. He's going to go and just rescind those executive orders, which is.
Oh, that's bad. That's a bad freeze. That's a bad freeze. Come on back.
Oh, am I still freezing?
Yeah, that's bad. Oh, there you are. No, you're fine. Keep going.
Oh, wow. So he's going to do some of that type of stuff. All presidents actually do this, rescinding all Biden's executive orders, at least the negative ones. He's going to be able to do that on day one. But Donald Trump is going to have, and I think the budget battle kind of showed us that Donald Trump may have issues with his own caucus because he can only lose one. And in fact, it's going to end up being two after, because Elise Stefanik, she's now going to be the ambassador. So that's actually going to leave Republicans down too. So that means that he can't even lose more than two people in all of these sort of battles. And so I think that he's going to see some pushback from the Freedom Caucus. He's going around attacking Chip Roy. And I'm sure you've seen, and I have just been laughing at it. You see how now Thomas Massie is now the evil person in Congress because he's essentially done the same thing that Congress Massie has been doing for years. But now that Donald Trump is coming back into office, everybody, the same people who amplified Thomas Massie saying, let's shut the government down, these same people now have turned against Thomas Massie, just like they turned against Chip Roy, just like they turned against Nancy Mace. Nancy Mace and Chip Roy being two of the people who voted to oust Kevin McCarthy. they turned on them. And so you're going to see a lot of people turning on a dime, not just because Donald Trump may have changed his position, but to appeal to Elon Musk. And I encourage you guys out there, an article that I wrote in the Washington Examiner, it dropped on Tuesday. It was about the Republican Party's Elon Musk. It was the Republican Party's Elon Musk problem. So I dropped it. Now, unfortunately, it ended up dropping at the same time that we got the fire. So it kind of, that story itself has been pushed to the back burner, but it talks about the problem that we're going to have with Elon Musk and how conservative influencers also are impacted by Elon Musk, because what they've decided to do is will tag Elon Musk. Members of Congress would tag Elon Musk because they want the attention. And the problem that you have with people like Elon Musk, aside from him being a billionaire influencing politics for the same party who for years have treated George Soros of all the billionaire, how dare Democrats, he's these prosecutors and attorney generals around this, country. The same people who attacked George Soros are now praising Elon Musk, and so that he can amplify anything that they're doing. Elon Musk, I think that it's going to be an eventual problem for Donald Trump, because you saw what he did around the whole H-1B visa issue, where it wasn't Elon Musk decided to then turn on the same people. Now, Elon Musk says, oh, no, we got to get all this racism and all of this stuff out of Twitter. These people need to be purged from the Republican Party, because Indian Americans felt impacted or felt, like they were being slighted. These Elon Musk and these same people who talked about the Indians, they didn't seem to have a problem, though, with the talking about Haitians eating dogs and cats.
They did not.
Nothing was racial in that at all. And you didn't see Elon Musk nor any of these people who were standing up for the Indian community. You didn't see any of them doing that when it comes to Haitian Americans. Well, we already know why, because they were Haitian Americans and not Indians. And I think that exposed something within Trump world that's going to have to be resolved. And I'll say, and I even mentioned this in the article, that the fact Donald Trump didn't come out and defend his own supporters after Elon attacked them, that will spell a problem for Donald Trump and possibly cause an issue between Donald Trump and his own base. Because we, and I say this as the 3-time Trump voter, we didn't vote for Elon Musk.
That's right.
So we don't need to follow Elon Musk on anything, but what you have the article.
Come on, Malik. Come on.
Oh, this is just terrible.
No, you're fine. You're fine. But
yeah, I've had people since the article dropped hit me up saying the Republican Party, Donald Trump would not have won without Elon Musk. And I asked them,
no, I don't buy that.
And I asked them, okay, explain to me what it is that you think Elon Musk, he has Twitter. I said, those are for monetization purposes. That has nothing to do with the campaign. And let's be clear, Elon Musk was dancing around with Ron DeSantis early on in the primary. It wasn't until after Donald Trump won the primary, after Donald Trump won the debate against Joe Biden, on the day that Donald Trump, the first attempted assassination against Donald Trump, that's when Elon Musk decided to support Donald Trump. All the work had already been done by then. So I encourage people who think that Elon Musk has played some sort of integral role, not just in the Donald Trump campaign, but in Republican politics, to just show me something. Show me something where between July 13th, which was the day that Elon Musk endorsed Donald Trump, and November 4th, show me what is it that Elon Musk could have done that we didn't already do before he got there. And I get no answer on that, except people just saying, well, we just need to thank Elon Musk. No, you're thanking Elon Musk because if he retweets you, that will get you a lot of engagement on your post or help in your monetization purposes. That's the benefit of Elon Musk. It has nothing to do with the Republican Party. It has nothing to do with even being supportive of Donald Trump, because Elon Musk, the billionaire tech bro as he is, can decide tomorrow, I ain't interested in this no more. And then we're going to be left standing.
Elon Musk is a tick on the ass of Trump. He's a parasite. It has nothing. And I'm being very serious about this. He has, like, they have inverted the power structure here. It's not that Trump needs Elon Musk. It's the other way around. Elon Musk is looking at Trump as for political clout and for monetary value, knowing full well that being that close to power, he can influence politics in a way that makes him more money. He's gone up, what, $100 billion? He's nearly at $500 billion. And of course, the policies that Donald Trump is going to put in, Elon Musk is going to be in Trump's ear in order to make those things to his advantage and to his benefit. Those people who think that Elon Musk or that Trump needs him, they're out of their minds. As you pointed out, Trump won that election when he got shot. I'd go far, I'd even say that. And I suspect that Elon Musk knew that, understood the gravity of that particular moment, and lumped into the Trump campaign for that. I have zero idea what they believe he would have, if he gave him $50 million. Okay, but Trump would have gotten that money anyway. He could have gotten that money anyway. Adelson's wife gave him, what, $100 million or some insane amount of money like that. Like, they are getting this monstrously wrong if they honestly believe that the tech bro, or that Trump somehow needs the tech bro. They're getting this way wrong.
And I also say that Donald Trump and Republicans, being led by Elon Musk, are misreading his actual mandate. Now, I'm one of those who thinks that any president who wins has a mandate. I don't care if you just win the popular vote or the electoral vote. Every president who wins has a mandate to do things. I think that Donald Trump, they're reading the room wrong by assuming that the 76 million people who voted for Donald Trump are so concerned about weeding out DEI in our federal government, or are so concerned about Greenland, or are so concerned about Panama, or are so concerned about Governor Trudeau in the state of Canada. No, not every person who voted for Donald Trump even cares about that. And I hear from people, okay, so when are we going to start talking about these lowering prices that Donald Trump campaigned on? That's what people care about. And when I say that Republicans are misreading the electorate, there is a potential that we go into next year, which is 2026, the midterms, and the Republicans are just assuming that, oh, well, all of these fight the woke, fight the DEI that used to be critical race theory, that's something that's going to drive people to the polls in 2026. If Donald Trump has not made any movement around the economy, immigration, and some of these other things, the very things that people said they had a problem with, come 2026, Republicans with already a 1 or 3 or so seat majority in Congress, in the House, they risk losing the House. I don't think that they're going to lose the Senate, but they risk losing the House simply because they misread the electorate.
Yeah, I mean, Canada, Greenland, and Panama didn't come up during the election. That wasn't litigated. That wasn't something like, it wasn't like he was on the debate stage and was like, and yeah, we're going to liberate Panama. That never came up. That's some nonsense that came up at the end now. And I agree with you. Trump got elected because the working class thought my wages were higher, my bills were less when he was in office. It was just that. There was no magic to it. It wasn't that they loved him. It wasn't that they even needed to like him. Kamala Harris ran around with Liz Cheney and wasn't giving this message that went to the working class. I mean, that stat was showing the working class moving to the Republican Party nails it. Now, if he is going to waste all of this time with Greenland and Canada and whatever other nonsense, I even think this notion of ending the war was part of it. This thing, I'm going to stop wars, not start wars. I think that was something that resonated. We'll see. I agree with you on this. They may be misreading the room. I don't even think the public cares all that much about the DEI stuff, to be honest.
They don't know. The public doesn't care about DEI in the same way that the public didn't care about critical race theory. Because notice, we spent a whole election cycle and nothing about critical race theory, because then that shifted to DEI. And as
Right.
we have seen for conservatives, DEI means, if they start with DEI means black and unqualified,
Pretty
then
much.
it's anybody who's not conservative. Then it's anybody who's not conservative, white, male, and heterosexual. That's
woman.
how, or woman. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is that's what DEI now means. And having Pete Hegseth, which is why I said that I thought he would have been better at the Department of Veterans Affairs, saying that
that they're going to get rid of it in the military or something.
no,
Come on.
Can't.
Come on.
it's coming. It's trying. It keeps
Yeah,
buffering
it's
out.
trying. It's
But
okay.
what they need to do is figure out, why can't you pass an audit? I think that the American people would be much more concerned about
Yeah.
that than rooting out DEI in the military.
Because I think what political parties miss sometimes is that the public would allow you your own pet project as long as you're doing the thing that they care about.
Mhm.
Like, it's almost like there's always a leaky bucket. Like, I would accept, like, for example, you could accept somebody like Sanders pushing in a certain direction that you may not all that much care about, as long as he's cutting your costs, as long as he's ensuring that he's doing the things that he said he was going to do over the course of the election cycle. I think the same thing is true for Republicans. They would accept this kind of pet peeve of the DEI stuff as long as you are increasing wages, as long as you're lowering their costs, lowering inflation. Like, they would allow you this kind of fluff on the side as long as you're doing the main thing. But if that is the thrust of your campaign, no. I don't think
And
nobody
what
gives a shit about the DEI stuff.
you've actually, because you've said it before, you used to talk about it a lot on the show, how if Americans saw where their money was going, and they felt like, okay, well, we're getting free healthcare, and it's actually a good system,
They'll be
people
okay
would
with
care.
that.
People would be okay with the amount of money that we're spending, but we're
Yeah.
not okay with it simply because this money just goes towards the military-industrial complex and all of
Yeah.
these other things that aren't taking care of the actual citizens.
Yeah, I spend $1,000 for the month, and I got rent, and I got somewhere to stay, and I got food on the
Mhm.
plate. Okay, well, that's a good waste of that money. If I don't have anywhere to live and I spent $1,000, like, what the hell? Where did my money go? People gonna feel some kind of way about it. Believe, man, I always enjoy having you on the show, and you always give a great breakdown of this stuff, especially what is going on in Republican circles. What is the name of that article again, so people would know it? It was in
So it
Washington.
is in the Washington Examiner, the Republican Party's Elon Musk problem. And I was going to announce that I was going to be back on CNN tonight.
How did it go last time, by the way?
It was actually good, but so I was checking an email. They booked me to come up to New York tonight to go on Abby's 10 o'clock show, but I just got the email that they're going to have to cancel it because of the fires. Everybody just really talking about the fires. But what he said is in the email is that if you still want to come to New York, the room is booked and the train is all yours. So I'll be going to New York just because.
Badass. So I'm going to be going to DC for the inauguration.
Okay.
Caleb wants me to speak at one of his conventions. I've never spoken at a convention before, and I was like, "Oh, dude, I don't know, man. I'm sorry, going to DC, right?" I was like, "Oh man, that is going to be a madhouse being in DC." But Caleb has come on the show so many times that I told him I'd do it.
It's going to be a madhouse.
It's going to be a madhouse. I am not looking forward to that madhouse. The speaking thing is a little bit weird. I never did a speaking.
You would be absolutely fine. What is it? Speaking on what?
Caleb is trying. It's funny. Caleb is one of these people that they always get him wrong, because they always, like Cenk Uygur. Cenk Uygur recently has been trying to make inroads on the right. It's not that he's changing his policies. He's just saying, okay, maybe I'm getting this wrong. Maybe we do need to reach out, and maybe we do need to try to, like, all of these people who are on the right, maybe all of these people are not hardcore right wingers. Some of these people might be lefties in a cloak because they're going for workers' rights and everything else, and they went to the Republican Party for a lot of this worker stuff. And so the cultish left has been attacking him for it, basically saying he's grifting, he's trying to go to the right, he's a Nazi. I mean, they're losing their minds on this stuff, right? But they do the same thing for Caleb. And Caleb is basically a communist. The guy, like the idea that the guy is a hardcore right winger is out of his mind. But he's willing to try to make inroads. And so they always attack him for it. So he has been trying to make this bridge to Donald Trump, effectively saying, we need a more peaceful world. And if you indeed believe and are serious about trying to end wars and not start them, then we need to be open to that. We shouldn't be reflexively against them when he's coming into office. Basically, we should be this kind of bridge to allow him the space to do that. So the event is trying to do that, trying to create the space and this, I guess, this vocal hope that he will follow through with this plan of I'm gonna end wars, not start wars. So I will be there.
That's dope.
On the 20th, and we're going to be at one of the hotels in DC. So I told him I'd do it. But I'm glad you're going to be. So you're going to New York and have a little trip. Have fun, man.
I'm just going to have a free trip, but I will be going up because I had already confirmed for next Wednesday. So I'll be on next. I'm going up there next Wednesday anyway. But you have to have me back post inauguration.
I will. Look, anytime you want to come on the show, man, you have an open spot anytime.
Well, consider it done.
You have a good one, man. Be safe. Enjoy your trip.
All right. Take care now.
All right. We have come to the end of a jam-packed show. Oh, wow. Okay. We've come to the end of a jam-packed show. As I said, all super chats will be read, and we have a lot of them today. Thank you. Like I said, buy me a cup of coffee. Look, guys, if you dig this content, like it, share it, subscribe to it, hit the notification bell. I pop in at all times of the day and night. When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. And you have me here doing the news at all times of the random night. If indeed you love this content, please consider giving through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All Super Chats or stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Even if you want to take the piss out of me, I will also read that. Give you kind of like a dunking booth. I want to thank all of you for this. And let's go through these now. Nia Kenton. Thanks, Jamal. No, thank you, Lisa Kenton. Thank you. I appreciate it. You guys make the show. And I mean that. I mean, it's you effectively pay for the show. Most of these shows are demonetized, or at the very least, the morning shows. So you guys pay for the show. I thank you for it. Mr. Ripley. As a longtime Jill Stein voter, what is this? And fan. I gotta say, Trump's shadow presidency hasn't been as bad as I was expecting. As far, just acknowledging Russia's interests in this is huge. Mr. Ripley, grudgingly, yeah, I have to say, agree with you. And I'm saying grudgingly because I'm expecting a lot of horrible stuff to come in this administration. But I guess up to this point, the worst has been the people who he's put into the administration. By the same token, there's some people I like. I like the fact that he got Tulsi Gabbard. I like the fact that he has RFK in that administration. I like some of the things he's been saying on the foreign policy front, not the Greenland stuff. That stuff is just weird. I understand why he's saying it. I mean, obviously, if Macron could come out and say, we are now going to take all of Africa because it is in France's security interest to take all of Africa. Okay, maybe he would do that, but he doesn't do it because France is a shitty military and it couldn't accomplish it. It goes back to this era where we just take what you can take. Might makes right. And the only way you have a country is you have force of arms to defend that country. Is that really the world that we want? Because that is kind of what Trump is insinuating. By the same token, Europe has brought this on themselves. Nobody told them to be vassals. Nobody told them to go from one occupation by Germany to an occupation by America, a soft occupation. Donald Trump is now just rubbing it in their face. Hey, we now need 5% instead of the 2%. We need you to buy our gas or else. We need you to annex your country, or we're going to annex your country, or else we're going to destroy you economically. That is just fucking outrageous. But from standpoint of we need to end this war and talking about it honestly, yes, when you have a war where 1 million people have been killed, like, it shocks the conscience. And so ending something like that, as opposed to having it continue and continue and continue, where you have these kind of sociopaths at the Washington Post saying it's better to effectively lose it as opposed to having a bad deal. It's like, shut the hell up. So no, I agree with you, Mr. Ripley. But again, he hasn't even taken office yet. So trust me, horror awaits. Horror absolutely awaits. Benoit Lapierre, finally, a magnified background. Congrats, brother. Keep going. Good work. And thank you for meaningful today and beyond. Thank you, Lapierre. But no, this is a real background. This is, I'm in a different room. I moved back to Richmond after I lost the job in DC when the radio station folded. All of us effectively were fired. When the radio station went belly up, we were fired on that day. So we went into work that day and left without a job. I was in DC kind of bumming around through Airbnbs. And so I have bummed myself back to Richmond. My ex plays this clip all the time because she thinks it's the funniest thing in the world, where Malik and I are talking. And Malik says, well, what would you be doing if you weren't doing radio? And I pause. I pull the mic close. And I was like, I'd be homeless. She thinks it's funny because I ain't technically homeless. I am at an Airbnb. So, no, this is an Airbnb. I'm going to be in Richmond. I'm probably going to move into an apartment at some point in Richmond. And so the background that you're saying is actually a real wall. But thank you. I agree. It is a much better thing as opposed to the wall of the place in DC. Free Greenland from Danish tyranny. Sparky, Trump may be giving Greenland some freedom. He may be giving them some freedom. We'll see. Free Canada from Castro regime. Again, he may be giving Canada some freedom also, considering the threats that he's been aiming at them about annexation. Sparky, the United States should guarantee Medicare for all, agreed to make them okay with statehood. Other states will then insist on it themselves, a direct way for Medicare for all states. You know what's wild? One of the Canadian provinces came out and was like, hey, America, maybe you should join Canada because all of you would get health care. Wouldn't it be nice to have health care? Wouldn't it be nice to not have your people die 10 years younger? I mean, she was laying it on thick about the services that the United States doesn't have and that deprives the citizens of, as opposed to the ones that Canada do provide for their citizens. She has a point. We have people going to Canada to get insulin that should tell you something about your own country. Or when you're paying trillions of dollars more than everywhere else for healthcare and your people die 10 years younger, that should tell you something about your country. Something is fundamentally wrong. Sparky, to answer the worker displaced by AI, Soylent Green. Soylent Green. They're people. They're eating people. They're eating people. Just in case people don't get the reference, Soylent Green were people. Soylent Green solves world hunger too. Oh, that's gross. That is gross. What is that movie? Snowpiercer, where the rich people were in the front parts of the train, the poor people were in the back of the train, and they eventually had them fight it out. And no, I'm thinking of different. Free body. So in Death's End, I believe. Okay, spoiler. In Death's End of that series of books, Earth Remembrance series. I'm getting tired. I must be getting tired. Earth Remembrance series. The third book in that series, the first one was Three Bodies, the second one was Dark Forest, and the third one was Death's End. A lot of people don't like Death's End. I thought Death's End was fantastic until it gets to the very end of the book. But all three books are fantastic. Dark Forest is mind blowing. It's just mind blowing. Like the book is so good. It's so good. Like yeah, I can listen to that book over and over and over and over again. It's that good. And it's not that, God, man, it's hard to explain. Because there are some people who like sci-fi who hates that book. It has to do with the ideas in that book. It's the concepts. They're so epic. And I think for me, for an American context, it's slightly different because it's a Chinese author. And so there's a different flair to the book than what you would get out of American authors. A cultural flair to it that's kind of hard to put my finger on, but it's there that you see it as you're reading through the book, just in the things that they say, in the perspectives, the weight of the words of the people and the way that they come across. But there's a part of that book where when Earth finally gets taken over because they give it to a woman, DEI candidate, wins the sword holder spot. And when the DEI candidate wins the sword holder spot, I'm saying that jokingly, but when the woman wins the sword holder spot, it is a different time. It is a far more passive time. And in that passive time, she basically gets suckered. Earth gets taken over. She wasn't willing to end the world. In fact, she wasn't willing to end both worlds. Aliens take Earth over, and at a certain point, they move everybody to Australia. So they move the entire planet just to Australia. And of course, there's no services, there's no food. And they're effectively told, what do you mean there's no food? There's living food all around you, effectively. You need to eat each other. And whoever wins after you eat each other, we will find a way to make life habitable on the planet. It's just rough. Soylent Green are people. Keith Alcock. Keith Alcock. I'm sorry, I'm being vulgar. Keith, thank you, man. I appreciate it. In fact, I appreciate all of you guys. Thank you for this. I really do. I'm going to end this. I am dragging ass. By the way, Garland and I will be doing the show this evening at 2 p.m., I believe. In fact, we're going to be doing it every Friday at 2 p.m. So definitely look out for that. You guys have a fantastic day. By the way, still doing chess. So I have my first chess lesson that is coming up on Monday. I don't know if he's going to do that live. We're probably going to do that in private. I'll see if he wants to do that one live for the audience. Maybe a little weird to do that right off the bat. And if it sucks, it's going to lose business. So it's kind of a risk. It's like risking it all. But that first chess lesson is going to take place. I guess he's going to be my guinea pig as I fine tune the process of doing those. Feel free. If you guys, like I said, if you want to stop the bullies, if you want to be able to go to the chess park and dominate, if you want to be a man in front of your woman, it's nothing more manly than beating the shit out of somebody in chess. And your woman is standing there and she has this look in her eye like, he's going to get some tonight. He's going to get some tonight. Or the other contrary one where she sees you get hammered and she doesn't even get in the car with you. She just gets in the back seat. If you want to avoid that, my chess lessons. Nothing more manly than a guy who can kick ass at chess. Nothing more manly. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I am going to say subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will see you guys at 2 p.m. this evening. You guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 74. Signing off. Have a good one all.